We're very honored to have all of you with us today. And on behalf of myself and the Santa Barbara Fly Fishers, I want to say thank you for attending and being here and taking the interest to find out about what I think is Santa Barbara's historic fish. I want to also recognize our sponsors that have been so kind as to support us and support what we're doing here. We Are Airstream from Ventura has been a great sponsor for us, as has Kohler Estate Wines on multiple levels, not only helping with putting this on, but also helping with the project we're going to talk about as we move forward today. Firestone 805 is a great sponsor that we appreciate, as is the American Riviera Bank and Costa. All of those are great sponsors for this event, and if you get a chance, you should go to them, buy their products, and enjoy the things that they have. And there's some great Airstream trailers out front that you can kind of go through and take a look at. And there's Kohler Wines that'll be around later today and all of those things. So thank you to our sponsors. And additionally, I want to say thank you on behalf of our 8 highly qualified speakers that are going to be presenting today, and you'll meet them in just a few minutes. They are really the stars of today and will inform us all about steelhead, what I think of as our most important resident fish in this region over the last 13,000 years. How many of you knew steelhead were here 13,000 years ago? Oh, that's great. All right. Our presenters are all experts on this fish and share a love of them for their beauty, mystery, and the places they live. They live in and enjoy the same things we like here in Santa Barbara, the ocean, the rivers, and the mountains that are behind us. So they are all keys to their survival, and I think they're keys to our enjoyment of this area. Our goal of today is to inform you about steelhead, its history, how they became listed as endangered, and how we can come together, all of us, to save them and promote their recovery. So to get us started, I want to introduce our moderator, Tom Simmons, who's up here with me. Tom's a great guy, and he'll be leading the program today, and he'll be introducing the panelists in just a moment here. He's a lifelong waterman, he says, including that he's run almost all the major rivers of the western United States. He's an avid fly fisherman, along with the rest of us in the club. And he's been an avid conservationist since 1969 Santa Barbara oil spill. So a lot of you, I'm sure, got motivated to stand up for our environment when that happened and started a nationwide movement, as a matter of fact. So with that, I'll turn you over to Tom Simmons. Come on up, Tom.
Thank you, Mark. My wife says my voice can cover the entire western United States, so if I'm screaming, let me know. If you can't hear me, you're probably in a good position there. Today, my first introduction is really exciting. If you guys have looked at the posters around, the artwork around, we have a very talented artist here that is just an amazing artist all the way around. We've got a short film that we're going to show. And Grace Fisher has honored us with coming down here and being a participant and a supporter. And without any further ado, I think the film does an amazing job of introducing Grace.
Every so often, if you're lucky, you'll meet a person who puts life in perspective.
I had a sense that something was really quite wrong.
She said that she was having a hard time breathing.
Then and there, I thought that she might die.
She opened her eyes for just like a second and she saw me and she smiled and then she just went back to sleep.
Love you.
And Debbie really had to pull me together. She had to say, don't lose it, because she's still alive.
From that day on, my life has been totally changed.
My whole focus was staying alive.
The whole day was dark, but there was one little speck of light, and you just aimed at that light.
Everyone thinks that they have it fixed. I'm done looking. I don't need to be fixed. I just really wanted the use of my hands again so I could play music.
She has to learn a different way of doing things.
Earl says, normal's boring. He wants to be normal anyways.
I woke up one morning and I was almost completely paralyzed. The melodies were there, still I couldn't write them down. I just kept them in my head.
It takes mentors to broaden your mind and the way you learn.
Dear Justin, my name is Grace Fisher. I've been an absolute fan of your work.
She spent hours in front of the computer composing.
Do you hear this kind of in a concert hall?
Yeah. I'd never written for a full symphony before.
With the limitations, you get other sort of powers. Now you can sort of hear it more in your head.
The great thing about art is it can be adapted and changed, and it's still art.
This town, this area, this group of people around in Santa Barbara, a greater community, never cease to amaze me what talent is hidden away in the corners. And on every level, that is a talent. I only hope I get to see an orchestra someday, an orchestral presentation of your music. It's amazing. Thank you, Grace. I really appreciate your contribution to our little Santa Barbara fly fishers here in the corner of Santa Barbara. Another hand for her, please. Go ahead.
Thank you. Well, I was super excited to paint the Steelhead, and I didn't really know anything about fly fishing or the Steelhead until Chris reached out and asked me to do this logo. And of course, it's unfortunate what happened to me, but it's really given me the platform to be able to advocate. And now that I know about the Steelhead and know about the cause to bring them back to Santa Barbara, I am definitely want to be able to share as much as I can to be able to advocate for these fish. And so thank you so much for thinking of me, and I'm just really happy to be able to be a part of this cause. So thank you.
Thank you, Grace. I want to point out one little detail. When someone, and many people say this, bringing Steelhead back to Santa Barbara, they're here. They've been here for 13,000 feet, 13,000 years. So it's our job to bring them back in multitudes, in greater population. Thank you, Grace. Thank you.
Yes.
So this is really great to see such a, it's a good turnout. We'd love to fill the place, but Mick Jagger was not available this afternoon, so you guys will have to do with us. Before we get too deep into the details here with this amazing group of speakers, I just wanted to start out and interject a little politics into this event, because I know it's a tough time and there's a lot of acrimony going around and all that. And, but in order to make America great again, we have to do what Senator John Lewis advised us to do. And that was, sometimes you just have to make good trouble. So that is exactly what we're going to do today. Say it again. I stumbled on it online. You're going to have to go talk to Mr. Google. Oh, I'm sorry. Make Steelhead wild again. So, what we're going to do today, we've got 8 speakers, we've got 4 groups. Your program kind of breaks it down. First group is going to be the history of steelhead, so we'll learn a little bit about that. Historically, such an important species in this area. We kind of count from Southern California being San Diego, Upper Baja, up to probably Point Conception. Group 2 is going to talk about moving from possible extinction to recovery. And the possible is we're on that way, but we're going to do something about it. Then we're going to have a question and answer period directed towards those 2 groups. So if you've got go ahead and throw out your questions and we'll answer them as best we can. Some of the questions might spill over into other expertise in the other groups. So if you don't get to your question during that first 15-minute time period, we're going to have a second one at the end of the second group of speakers. And then if you really got a good question and you want to hang out and have a one-on-one talk, the speakers are all going to be hanging around, and we'll either see you here, you can come on up and chat with them, or out in the courtyard. And then at the very end, I think I mentioned this, at the very end we'll have another 15-minute question and answer period. So I'd like to now introduce the individual speakers. I'm going to introduce all of them. They're all going to be coming up on the stage, and they'll flip around their name tags there. We were trying to save a couple of dollars on the cost of 2-sided tags, but so they'll spin those around so you can identify the folks. So let me start off here with Mr. Kyle Evans. He's the California Department of Fish and Wildlife Southern California Program Manager, lead on Southern California steelhead, and he's our state's leading scientist on the ground advocate for Southern California steelhead. Next, we've got Nakia Zavala, Cultural Director of the Santa Ynez Band of the Chumash Indians. She is our cultural connection to the original residents of the Santa Barbara region. Brian Troutwine, Environmental Defense Center in Santa Barbara. I've been told Brian here could be called the grandfather of steelhead recovery in Santa Barbara, but I don't think he's that old. But with a name like that, you were destined to work on trout and drink wine in Santa Ynez Valley. I just had to put that out there. Tim Robinson, Fisheries Division Manager, Kachuma Operations and Maintenance Boards. And having any steelhead in the Santa Ynez River is probably because of Tim's dedication and work. This is a guy on the ground, and we've met him a couple of times, and if we had some wacky question about doing things in the Santa Ynez, he straightened us out fast. Most likely he'd already done it or tried to do it and failed. So valuable component. Let's see, Kyle Evans, let's see, where are we here? Yes. Oh, that was him. Russell Marlowe, California Trout, Southern California Project Manager, Steelhead Recovery Director. And the note here is the man for California trout and their effort to save our Santa Barbara steelhead. So these are all heavily involved individuals in the science and in the recovery. Next, we've got Derek Kohler, manager of the Kohler Winery. That's home to the steelhead migration barrier that our club is sponsoring and hope to remove in 2025. I'd like to mention here, this has been probably a year ago, we at the Santa Barbara Fly Fishers got a video that Derek had sent to us, and it caused quite a stir in the fly fishing group. It was a photo of the catch pool at the bottom of a concrete slide, which is an amazing bit of ridiculous construction in San Ynez on the Kohler Winery, and they're in the process of removing that, building a new bridge, mitigating the whole part so that Steelhead can get up higher. But that photo of 3, I think 4 nice steelhead in this pool set off a bunch of rabid fly fishermen, and we couldn't believe it. So we have, next we have Nate Irwin, Group 4, Santa Barbara Channel Keeper, local steelhead artist and local advocate. We've called just about everybody else Mr. Steelhead, so sorry, Nate, we ran out of titles like that for you. Last, but definitely not least, Dr. Mark Rockwell, Santa Barbara Conservation Committee Chair, Santa Barbara Steelhead Coalition lead. Mark was instrumental in the removal of multiple dams on the Klamath River. I'm not sure if everyone is familiar with this, but the Klamath runs from Oregon, Lake Klamath, Klamath Lake, through southern Oregon into California, and 4 dams have been removed? 4 dams have been removed, and if you've ever seen anything more inspiring is the explosion of a dam and water blasting out of the bottom. I suggest you go online and look at it, and it's a wonderful thing to see if you're a river runner or a fisherman or Native American. I mean, it was a pretty amazing event, and Mark was involved in that for over 20 years.
Yeah, it was the largest dam removal river restoration project in world history to date. California trout was also one of our avid and important participants in that, along with Trout Unlimited and many, many, many others. So it takes all of us to make things happen.
Mark's a little too modest. I'm going to have to interject here. And for 40 years, he's been an admirer of steelhead and the places they live. That might include fly fishing. I'm not sure about that one, but I guess it might be. If you've ever seen the article in the Santa Barbara Independent, you'll know that Mark likely picked the photograph of him holding a 30-inch, 28, a very healthy fish. All joking aside, our San Ynez River had fish like that. And I've seen photographs, we may see some tonight, of strings of them, and it blows my mind where we are now to where we were. But Mark, I'm sure, selected that photograph to go onto the front page, but then he also, number 2, selected the second picture, which is a picture of his good friend, John Grace, and a member of our club. And John has a palm-sized rainbow trout in his hand, and I'm not sure what the comparison was all about, but I just hope it wasn't a steelhead in our local stream. But there you have it. Mark Rockwell is our lead man and last speaker. So what I'm going to do now is we'll introduce the first speakers. That'll be Kyle Evans. And our first topic will be what are steelhead, where do they live, life history, and why they're important. So you can here at the podium or set at the table.
All right. Perfect. Let's grab that. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, I was asked to come here today and talk primarily about what is a steelhead and go over some of the life history. So as mentioned, I work for the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. I'm a program manager, and I oversee some of our fisheries programs in Southern California. And really, to get started, I think that I wanted to go with, what is a steelhead? We've all heard different names. People say steelhead, they say rainbow trout. You might hear juvenile steelhead or omicus, the scientific name of Oncorhynchus micus. But really, these are the same fish. It is a different expression of your life history. It's what path you choose, if you're going to the ocean or if you're staying in freshwater. You can see in this picture here, I mean, this is one of our adult sea-run steelhead, as opposed to this little resident right next to it. So really, when it comes to the nomenclature and how to refer to them, I prefer to use steelhead rainbow trout. It just covers it. You're getting your steelhead version, your rainbow trout version, and you're covering that kind of complex history. And speaking of complex life history, there's going to be a test on this later. We're going to go over all the different pathways in which they can succeed. But it is really complicated. These fish are extremely adaptable and with their life history. And we're basically going to go through all kind of the steps of it, right? We understand that these are a type of salmon, and they are really born in fresh water is where we're going to begin our journey. And then we're going to go through some of the different habitats and trials and things that they go through. One thing to point out is that the completion of this life cycle is going to take multiple years, and it's going to take years where you're in freshwater and when you're in saltwater or you're using the lagoon. So one point I really want to drive home over the course of this talk is that these fish really rely on healthy watersheds that are kind of having that natural flow regime and natural process in order to complete it. So say you're born in freshwater, we start living there for a couple years. Really, the first big decision you have to come to is freshwater or saltwater. What am I going to do? This is going to be controlled by a number of different factors. There's a genetic component to it. What did your parents do? That's going to affect, say, some of your behavior. There's the kind of external factors in the environment where you're growing up. Are you able to grow really quickly? Are there a lot of food sources or not? And then there's that internal condition side of it, where basically how is the health of that fish? Whether it's growing really quickly or if it's not growing very fast, and is it ready at a certain time to go out to the ocean or not? There's also some costs and benefits that are associated with it, right? If you stay in freshwater your entire life, you are going to be a smaller fish in general, but for that benefit, you're less likely to run into a sea lion or an osprey. There's less mortality. You don't need to migrate, which is a huge cost of time and energy, swimming anywhere from tens to hundreds of miles to get to your spawning habitat. And you're more likely to spawn multiple times. And then kind of the opposite of that, if you look at it from the anadromous side, you can grow a lot bigger. Bigger fish tend to produce a lot more eggs. So you have a higher level of fecundity is what we call it. And you can be more competitive. So when you come back and you're spawning, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later, you're more likely to be successful, right? You can chase away some of those smaller fish that are getting in the way. If you do want to go out to the ocean, really you have to fight with a lot of different problems. And it's really difficult to really, in Southern California, get to the ocean and come back. I wanted to talk about kind of the migration timing and some of the opportunities. We have really flashy systems, right? It might be dry one day and then you get this big mud flow the next day and the river kind of drops back down quickly after that. So these fish are very opportunistic. Typically, we see smolts, or that's the life stage we call when they're moving from freshwater and transitioning so that they can handle that saline salt water and going out to the ocean. We see these smolts emigrating from our watersheds, typically somewhere in that February, March, April, May period. And then we see our anadromous adults coming upstream a little bit earlier than that, typically December through maybe April or May. I put October here because we have records of fish showing up that early. Really, they just are very opportunistic, and if you've lived here or seen the storms around Southern California, your one chance to move upstream, it might be December 1st. It might be late November. It just really depends on what storms we get. Another thing to consider is how much water it takes. If you're imagining, Mark's fish, which I think it started at 28 and then you said 38, so it's somewhere in there. A big fish is going to be a relatively deep body depth, right? So if you've got something where you have a big fish, you need enough water where it can make it upstream without, scraping and injuring itself on all the rocks, where it can get up without, exposing its entire back and much more likely to be predated on by something looking for a good meal or a fly fisher. So it's important to consider, how long is that little creek going to be deep enough for that fish to get up? Once you actually get up into, from the ocean, you're making your way up towards the habitat, or if you're a resident and you're spending your life in freshwater, it's really important to have kind of that high quality habitat that can support these fish. Really, they prefer colder water, so less than maybe 64 degrees Fahrenheit. They can handle a lot warmer temperatures than their cousins and like steelhead you might find in Northern California or Oregon or Washington. But still relatively cold with a good amount of dissolved oxygen. And the key is they need a lot of different habitat types, right? If you're going to be spawning, then you need spawning gravel. You need areas where you have kind of fast river flow moving over, bringing oxygen to the eggs. If you're staying over summer, then you're going to need either deep pools or refugia or places where you can hide that stay wetted. You also need different types of cover to make sure you're not going to be eaten, whether you're hiding under logs or boulders or things like that. And then you need that complexity because there's a lot of different types of habitats and they serve different purposes. Some types of habitats like riffles might be better at producing food sources, as opposed to pools might be better at giving these fish a place where they can hang out in kind of deep areas and wait over summer. So our fish started in freshwater, went to the ocean, came back, and then we get around to spawning. So the act of spawning itself, these fish are going to end up digging what's called a redd, or is called their spawning nest. I did try to illustrate a little bit with some of the orange dots here to kind of show where in a redd these kind of eggs are going to be. But basically, a fish comes up, it is going to find an area with appropriate size gravel or cobble, and it's going to kind of use its body and its tail, and it's going to dig into the ground and kind of make a depression, at which point they are going to release their eggs. Those eggs are going to be fertilized by a male, and then they're going to continue digging and expanding this redd, and they're going to cover those eggs with gravel. The eggs basically sit in the gravel for anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks, depending on your water temperature. And basically, from there, they're going to emerge. The idea is that the eggs are protected in the gravel, and they're getting kind of that flow of water and oxygen that's coming through to them. I included a couple pictures here. These are some of the redds that we've actually seen in different areas. So if you're in the river, you might see this kind of clearing where they either knocked away algae or debris that was in the way, or they made a depression. They kicked kind of rocks out of the way. Sometimes smaller rocks will travel a little further, so you get kind of a well-defined pot. So I know that was a quick overview of life cycle, and there's a lot of information, but I wanted to throw up this chart here just as a different way to kind of represent the life. If you're starting kind of at your eggs, and then you're this young fry, you're going through your summer, your maturation, and finally reproducing. And this kind of shows the linkage between all that. So it's kind of showing that you're going to need different types of habitat, whether it's your headwaters and lagoon, whether it's your ocean, in order to complete this life cycle. So sometimes there's a focus where people say, well, they only need that migration to get up and downstream. But that's not really true. These are all connected. You have to be able to exist in freshwater and survive there. You have to be able to get to and from the ocean. You have to be able to respawn. So there's an importance on kind of having that water and that habitat throughout the year. One thing I wanted to bring up is this kind of idea from the California Environmental Flows Framework, where we look, at least in Southern California and California in general, the different types of periods of stream flow throughout the year. You have kind of your fall pulse flow, you get that early storm in October or November. You have your winter with your big peak flows and kind of base, and then that's spring and dry season. And in order for these fish to survive and really succeed, this is what they're adapted to, is this kind of natural flow regime. And it's important when we're looking at things like having that dry season base flow, having that perennial habitat and that water where these fish can live. I mean, this is a picture taken a couple months apart from each other, in the exact same spot. So you can see some of the changes we have, particularly in the lower watersheds. Let's see. I wanted to touch a little bit too quickly in my last minute here about some of kind of the historic presence and occupation. These fish were extremely prolific. They were pretty much everywhere you can imagine historically. They've been on the landscape for thousands and millions of years. There has been some work done, by the National Marine Fisheries Service where we're looking at potentially where they could be. We call it an intrinsic potential based on their on the geology, on the hydrology, on the elevation, that kind of thing. And really, these kind of dark areas in Santa Barbara County, these are areas with high potential to have had steelhead historically. The areas with kind of the lighter green are at low potential. But I mean, I just wanted to show, and this is pretty much every streamline. These fish were around, and they were a really big part of this county, particularly about 100, 120 years ago, and about our culture, is we did have this really popular fishery. I mean, we're seeing tons of people lined up around the Lompoc estuary, the San Ynez estuary. We're seeing some of these big fish. We're seeing multiple life stages of fish, so some big and small. We're also seeing, a lot of these big advertisements, right? Some of the best trout fishing in California can be found in Lompoc in the early 1900s. I know it sounds a little crazy to think about today. But this was really just a big part of this community. And as a part of this, we're going to talk about some of the decline later with some of the other talks, but there was also a lot of efforts to try to keep this fishery going, particularly through a lot of stalking and what my department did back in the day. And this is something we have to consider today, right, is what are the influences and the ramifications of those efforts historically. So when we were putting a bunch of these non-native fish on the landscape, are they still there, and how do we kind of support native and wild genetics? So we'll be talking about some of that restoration later, but hopefully that was a quick overview, at least to get you started on steelhead biology.
That was amazing, Kyle. Thank you so much. Every time I see someone else speak on this, I learn something. And I was especially interested in the first person references talking about us spawning and us going upstream. That's my next lifetime, by the way. I'm just wanting to let everybody know. Our next speaker is our tribal relationship speaker to our local San Ynez area, and the whole cultural connection between the steelhead fish and all the species in Santa Barbara. And this is our connection to back in the day, if you will, not just the 50s, but negative 15,000. So with no further ado, Nakia Zavala.
Hakuaku, Maktuka Nakia Zavala, Alapalahulapu, Nisamala Chumashino, Makaluk Shahus, Kiskon. Hello, everybody. As I was introduced, my name is Nakia Zavala. I'm from San Ynez. We call that area Alahulapu in our language, the place around the bend. So I'm sure if you've been on 154, we are around the bend, pretty much. So our ancestors were very specific on how they describe things. My family is the Zavala family of the reservation. I am the 7th great-granddaughter of Kilikut the Iwit, one of our traditional leaders, and one of our eldest ancestor grandfathers we can connect ourselves to. I'm also the 5th great-granddaughter of Maria Solares, and if you've been to the Santa Barbara Museum of Natural History, they highlight my 5th great-grandmother as the main matriarch of my reservation, as well as responsible for being an informant to J.P. Harrington that spent about 3 to 4 years with her, recording our language, our culture, our genealogy, and many traditional stories. And that is where we go to. So it is our, if you will, Bible on our culture and our language and who we reference. I also want to pay respect to Quetzalcoatl, Fernando Librado, Rosario Cooper, and other ancestors that also left so much behind for our people. So I couldn't be up here to talk about anything about the Steelhead unless I go back to the ancestors. We have to go back to a time when our people were not affected by colonization. And when we talk about how our landscape has changed, you know, it wasn't just for our people, but it was for our surroundings. It was the plants, the water that were all affected by these new animals that came to our land, and how it disrupted our ecosystem and how our people lived in harmony with it. And I learn all the time. So I'm about a 19-year language student. I consider myself still a beginning cultural bearer. I still learn more and more about who I am as a Chumash woman, as a Chumash person from my ancestors. So when I was asked to come up to speak, I was going, oh my goodness, I'm not much of a fisher. I mean, actually, I probably fished more in the Sierras a long, long time ago. And so, you know, being able to stand up here and talk a little bit about my people, I think is great. And I don't have that much time. I first want to recognize our Chumash villages here within Chumash territory. And as you can see, we span it from Malibu, all the way up to the top northern coast, we say about Paso Robles area, and inland to the San Joaquin Valley. And I just want to, it's really small, but pay very close attention to those villages that are along the coastline. You know, those areas along the coastline will be around these important estuaries where the Steelhead entered through. So, you know, and looking at language and how it tells us the story or describes the places of where the Steelhead would come in through, you know, for us, we came up with a word and we coined this. So when I was looking through the old notes, we didn't have a word for estuary. So we came up with Steelhead Asate Asahmin, where the river meets the ocean. And this art renderation shows a village site right here on one of the coastlines. It shows where the ocean is coming in and meets the fresh water. And what we know for sure is that steelhead was definitely part of our diet. We know that it opened up such a big area of our cultural landscape. And I just want to highlight, as we talk about steelhead, for us as Chumash people, we go into areas of what did we use to fish? So in some of the other work that I do as the cultural director and tribal historic preservation officers, I'm able to look at some of our artifacts. I'm actually able to look at some of the different barbs that our people use to fish in the fresh water. So talking about steelhead for Chumash people isn't, I have to say respectfully, just bringing them back. It also opens up our worldview. It changes our lenses to look at these spaces as our ancestors looked at them. And in this time, we were continuing decolonizing our spaces, indigenizing them. We call it Somalifying them for San Ynez Chumash people. You know, it opens up so many different areas. You know, we had canoes. We had dugout canoes in these fresh waters. They were made out of, you know, cottonwood trees. You know, we have not done that yet. So when we talk about steelhead, again, I'm opening up my eyes to all these different things that our people can be doing and continuing to do from the ancestors and their knowledge and what they taught us. It also speaks to the different habitats within those areas, the birds. Everything is, as we know, is delicately connected, and there has to be a fine balance. So that's what's very exciting about talking about the return of the steelhead. Oh, well, I shouldn't say that. They're here. They're here. You know, it's about increasing the population, creating a space, you know, for them to flourish, and so we're not talking about them being an endangered species. So as I mentioned a little while ago, you know, the ancestors left so much knowledge. And by the way, this is Maria Solars, if you don't know who she is, my 5th great grandmother. And then that's Quetzalcoatl Fernando Librado. That's right below her. So with traditional stories, we have stories of water. Now, for our culture, before we were human beings, the animals were still people. So our belief is that when the animals were still people, they walked and talked like human beings. They interacted with each other as such. And with our traditional stories, Maria talks about actually salmon and coyote. So I think this is very interesting as we talk about the steelhead, who we call onso. Onso is a name for trout and steelhead. And then for salmon, it's okowoch. So for our traditional languages, if we have a word for it, that means it existed in our world. That means it was here. So let's add that to our list. What did that look like? The fact that my people had a story about salmon and coyote, and just so you know, coyote's a trickster in our culture, and so he's always up to no good. So basically, you better watch your wives. He's gonna steal, he's gonna lie, he's gonna do something. So anyhow, as the story goes, Coyote pretty much bewitches salmon and is singing him to jump out of the water so he can eat him. And, he's a glutton, so he sang and sang. So he had so much salmon, it was too much for him. So it's one of those traditional stories that teaches us about gluttony and not to take more than we should. So again, talk about taking care of our land and our water and the different species. It goes back to our traditional stories and how we are the original caretakers of this land. As I mentioned, our cultural practices, our dugout canoe, and then, of course, the harvesting of the okowoch or the anso. I thought about this talk and what could I share with you that would be beneficial? And I think what's going to be great about this conversation, I'm hoping to move this further, is how we can come together as a community, acknowledging traditional ecological knowledge and bringing in the scientific information, and also a recognition of who we are today as human beings and what we can do better to care for our land and our water. And I think when we start looking at this from these different approaches, that we can come together and really create a plan and a roadmap and how we can do a better job and really go back and fix the things that have happened that has contributed to this horrific situation. I realized when I sat down and thought about this a little bit more, we're going to have to really deal with some really serious issues and pushback. We have a lot of wells that are on private property, and how that's affected our San Ynez River. Those pictures are great, and we have pictures like that within our tribe. We have the San Jacinto Creek that runs through the reservation. My dad talks about a time when he remembers the water was running, and he would go down there and fish. We would have crawdads. It was alive. Right now, it's dry. There's no water there. And it's really sad because when I hear those stories, it makes me wonder. Well, what happened? What contributed to this issue? And I think that as we peel back the layers, we're really going to get down to the seriousness and really hard conversations that need to happen with those that are involved with helping change this. I also, think about my grandson and how we can change the future for our grandchildren. And what a great thing to really be part of in bringing back, not bringing back, it's here, bringing up the numbers for the steelhead and how we as a community, again, can come together to support that effort. So I mentioned a little bit about, the ancestors and their knowledge. I do want to talk a bit about sustainability and what that looks like, and addressing some of those issues, which I mentioned a little while ago. Estuaries, for some reason, about 3 years ago, just really kind of spoke to me. I don't know if you've all been to Oso Flaco, but it's a beautiful estuary up north, absolutely beautiful. And of course, the mouth of the San Ynez River, in which some of those pictures were from. Those are all beautiful areas in which we have to pay a little bit more attention to and see how we can support the agencies that oversee those bodies of water. And again, it's all connected. How could we do this in a way to that water isn't just staying within that area, but we're figuring out what that flow looks like. and how we can connect it. As I mentioned earlier, dialogue on water issues with landowners, state agencies, and county agencies. And I think as community members, I mean, we can have more of these town hall meetings and support one another and really understand the obstacles that we face in doing this work. And that is my talk for today. Kaki Nash, and thank you so much.
I love a good education. Something came to my mind. I've just been reading a book about Alexander Humboldt, which is an amazing book. But aside from that, early 1800s, supposedly he brought together art and science into the discovery of nature. Very Eurocentric, very us. But what I just realized while listening to her was there's a third wheel, third leg to that stool, and that's the culture that's there that knows that predated all of our invention of nature. And I really appreciate that, because without that, we don't learn what it was like. I'll let other people speak on it. Next speaker we have is Brian Troutwine. Why Steelhead? Oh, are we going to the question answer? After this one, okay. So Brian Troutwine, why steelhead are important and regional land use changes threatening their survival.
Hey, thank you, everybody. It's good to see you. Thanks for coming out. How y'all doing? All right. I'm Brian Troutwine with the Environmental Defense Center, the EDC. It's a nonprofit, public interest, environmental law firm that's represented over 140 different nonprofits in our 50-year existence. And thank you. And I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that we're all on Chumash land. These creeks and rivers are all on Chumash land that was never ceded. So, thank you. EDC works in four different program areas. This photo is a steelhead or trout jumping over a dam in the Goleta area. So they are still here. These are the EDC's work to protect a lot of open spaces. If you've been out to Elwood Mesa or Douglas Family Preserve or the Carpinteria Bluffs or Sedgwick Ranch, EDC's also gotten over 24 species listed under the Endangered Species Act, including the tidewater goby, red-legged frog, and tiger salamander that we share this landscape with. EDC's ocean program is responsible for protecting marine sanctuaries and getting a ban on fracking off the whole California coast, which is in effect today, and ending the, thank you, and ending the sea otter relocation program, letting the sea otters come back to the Santa Barbara Channel. And EDC is currently working to defeat the dangerous oil project proposed by Sable on the Gaviota coast. We've defeated numerous onshore and offshore oil projects, oil train projects, oil trucking projects, and 3 LNG projects on our coast, and we back clean energy. And our new environmental justice program, we've been doing this work for a long time, but we put it in a program to protect the underserved communities, which are on the front line of pollution from oil fields and power plants. And EDC has also supported the Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary. How many of you have seen a steelhead in Santa Barbara County? All right, that's a good number. How many have seen 10? Okay, good, I'm there with you. I know Tim's seen more than that. Well, this area was, or may have been, a refuge for steelhead during the last ice age, giving way to the populations further north. Southern steelhead are adapted to warm water, which is critical in our warming climate. It's critical to preserve this species. Steelhead are an indicator species, they're an umbrella species, and a keystone species. And what that means is when we have steelhead, the whole watershed thrives. But the populations dropped by 99%. Now they're one of the rarest fish in America. They persist here despite our fires, our debris flows, and our droughts because they can live as either a trout, as Kyle indicated, or go to the ocean and become a steelhead. It gives them options, and that's why they survive here. All right, this is a 22-inch steelhead in one of our local creeks, and her 10-inch mate, which is a resident trout. So yes, they are the same species. They're swimming over a red, or their nest, and this is the problem we have. Whoops. All right, well, we'll go to the next one. The problem we have is that these fish get trapped below barriers. They can't get upstream to the perennial waters, and then wells and water diversions dry up their habitat. It's the 1-2 punch. So these are the creeks in the Goleta area that have supported trout or steelhead since the 1970s, the ones in green. Only 2 or 3 of these still support trout and steelhead. And these are very small populations, which could disappear with the next drought, the next debris flow, or the next new water well that could be drilled. Again, what's threatening them is barriers to migration, preventing them from getting upstream, and water extraction projects drying up the creeks and rivers. Now, flood control channels like dams are also barriers to steelhead migration. When Goleta proposed a larger flood control channel in San Jose Creek, EDC ensured that that channel was retrofitted with fish passage, and you can see the weirs on the right side of that channel there. Fish passage is crucial, but we must also conserve the flows in our creeks and rivers. So this is Cal Fish and Wildlife, Kyle's agency, rescuing 43 trout trapped below a dam in the Goleta area. You can see they got one there. And this is the same pool where we've had to call wardens a couple of times because people are illegally fishing there. But fish rescues are not a long-term solution. Plans are underway to remove this very barrier so the fish can get upstream, the spawners can get to the perennial headwaters. Carpinteria Creek, 2008. Landowner turned on a well overnight, a 10-foot deep pool went dry, killing these 24-inch spawners and a bunch of rainbow trout. Regulating water wells would lessen this threat, but currently water wells don't trigger any kind of environmental review. And in Mission Creek, right here in Santa Barbara, the Mission Tunnel, which delivers water from Gibraltar Reservoir, acts as a French drain and it depletes the water in Mission Creek. When the city voluntarily released water into Mission Creek from the tunnel, we had steelhead 7 of those 10 years. So we're working to restore the flows in our creeks and rivers to bring back the steelhead. San Ynez River, largest run in Southern California, up to 30,000 steelhead. 1954, Bradbury Dam went in, forming Cachuma Lake, cut the population by 99%. In 2008, we had 16 steelhead. That's the most we've seen since. The dam blocks migration up to the good habitat upstream, and it dries up the river. Steelhead and trout get stuck in drying pools because of agricultural and municipal water demand. We're all part of the problem as well as the solution. So CalTrout hired EDC to challenge the water rights permits for Cachuma. And in 2019, the State Water Board agreed with us and with Cal Fish and Wildlife and National Marine Fisheries. They ordered the Bureau of Reclamation to release more water into the San Ynez River. But there's still impaired flows. It's not enough, and the dam still blocks migration. Well, the State Water Board also ordered the Bureau of Reclamation to do a fish passage study to get steelhead upstream from Lake Cachuma. And that study's underway, but the initial steps really leave a lot to be desired. It doesn't instill a lot of confidence that the Bureau of Reclamation is going to do a good job on fish passage. That's why we all have to remain vigilant. And under the Endangered Species Act, the Bureau of Reclamation consults with the National Marine Fisheries to ensure the Cachuma project does not jeopardize Southern California steelhead. The agencies have a plan they came up with in 2000, but it didn't perform very well, and the population has continued to drop. Unfortunately, the Bureau of Reclamation has unintentionally exceeded its take limit, the number of fish that can perish incidentally due to the operation of the Kachuma project. And the Bureau was unable to sustain the required flows to keep the river flowing. EDC and Caltrout sued the Bureau back in 2014 when Kachuma's pumps failed, killing hundreds of juvenile steelhead. Now, the agencies have come up with or are working on a new plan. They agreed to come up with a new plan in 2005. We still don't have a new plan, and it's just taken too long. We still don't have a better plan, and fish continue to perish in the San Ynez River. In 2016, the National Marine Fisheries Service came up with a draft new plan, but the Bureau was unwilling to sign it. This 20-year stalemate may be jeopardizing the existence of Southern California steelhead. But thanks to Tim Robinson, my colleague, we still do have steelhead in the San Ynez River. He's a big reason for it, and we're grateful to him. But we must manage our water resources more wisely. Okay, here we go with a 16 to 18-inch steelhead. See if you can see it swimming around in a local creek. But it's the same story. They got stuck below a barrier.
Okay, right there.
Can't get upstream, and the creek goes dry. These are the Kool-Aid fish. Just add water and they show up. But our thirst for water has really been a problem. This is a video too. There they go. Okay. Again, stuck below a barrier, can't get upstream. Can't get upstream and trying to spawn downstream in a drying creek. That's the problem. They're getting stuck below barriers, and the creeks are sucked dry by wells and diversions. And here we go, also again, stuck below a dam, but building a red. You can see the nest there that the two fish are in, and she's digging out her nest right there to lay eggs, because she can't get upstream to the good habitat. But this pool's gonna go dry too. That's the problem. That's the fate of our steelhead, unless we solve the problem. Okay, the San Ynez River again. Solvang is proposing 2 new water wells, and you can see one of their existing wells right to the left of the riverbank there. 2 more wells would take a lot more water out of the river, and combined with Kachuma would really be devastating to the steelhead. Well, again, Caltrout hired EDC. We went to the State Water Board and we worked with National Marine Fisheries and Cal Fish and Wildlife to enforce the environmental laws and protect the steelhead. We're currently awaiting the State Board's decision. These quasi-legal proceedings are essential to uphold the laws and protect Santa Barbara steelhead. And in another case, EDC and Los Padres Forest Watch sued over the Twitchell Dam on the Santa Maria River, and now the Bureau is proposing to release more water in the Santa Maria River. So, in conclusion, water extraction and barriers have nearly wiped out the Santa Barbara steelhead. Solutions include sustainable water supplies, like potable reuse and conservation, purchase or donation of water rights, and putting that water back in the creeks and rivers, fish passage projects so spawners can access the headwaters, and using the laws, the Endangered Species Act, the Fish and Game Codes, the Public Trust Doctrine. This is EDC's specialty as an environmental law firm. And regulating water wells. If we don't regulate water wells, they'll continue to deplete the groundwater and the creeks and rivers along with it. And then getting the city of Santa Barbara to release water from the Mission Tunnel into Mission Creek, where we used to have a healthy steelhead population. We know what needs to be done. We have the knowledge. What we need is we need the political will and the priorities. Get a sense of the right priorities, and that's where you come in. So be part of the solution. Take a shot of the QR code, get on EDC's newsletter, stay informed, join our mailing list, contribute to EDC, contribute to Caltrout, contribute to Channel Keeper, to the fly fishers, come to our events and help spread the word, and thank you for helping save Santa Barbara steelhead.
I was going to say he's the new sheriff in town, but he's not quite yet. If only. Tim Robinson, Steelhead Monitoring and Habitat Restoration, Lower San Ynez River.
Good afternoon, everybody. Kind of interesting to follow Brian's talk, given all that he had to say there. I want to first give a shout out to Grace. Really a cool logo that she put together for this gathering. Unbelievable, so pretty and so well done. Second of all, I want to thank the Santa Barbara Fly Fishers for inviting me to come speak and for gathering such a distinguished group of panelists here. It's pretty cool to see all these folks up here. Mark has been hounding me to get involved for a long, long time, so I really appreciate that, so thanks a lot. So I'm going to talk a little bit about all the monitoring that we do out on the San Ynez River to make you a believer that we still do have steelhead out there. And then I'm going to show you some projects that we've put forward that are pretty darn positive. So given the fact that you guys are all a bunch of fly fishermen, I think the first thing, and I would be remiss not to put up here right off the get-go, that, sorry, fishing is illegal. We don't want you fishing out there. I was involved back over a decade ago to put together these signs with the Tri-County Fish Team, which is a group that advocated for steelhead in Ventura, Santa Barbara, and San Luis Obispo counties. We put these signs up, and we put them all over the place to alert people you cannot fish for steelhead, rainbow trout. Even if you're targeting another fish, you cannot fish below keystone barriers, okay? And that's a really important thing because we do see people out there poaching. And really, that if you want to be a great advocate and a advocate for the steelhead and the recovery of the steelhead, don't poach. Talk to your colleagues, your family, your friends. Don't do that. It's really a detriment to the return of the steelhead. And here, here's some people that got caught by the warden. They were fined. You will be found. There's some other people sneaking around in the bushes. We really don't like that because it's really hard to get these fish to come back and to have people go out and indiscriminately fish for them. No go, okay? All right. So I work for the Kachuma Operation and Maintenance Board, which is a consortium of currently 4, used to be 5 water districts that work with the Bureau of Reclamation on the Kachuma project. And the Kachuma project put in Lake Kachuma, Bradbury Dam to supply water here for Santa Barbara. It was voted in a public project. It wasn't just the Bureau that did it. And so I've been involved with this project and working with Reclamation to run the Kachuma project. So just a quick little history on the Kachuma project, and then you'll understand why we're doing what we're doing. The Kachuma, well, the project was started in 1950 and completed in 1953, not 4, right? And so my group, Kachuma Operation and Maintenance Board, was tasked by Reclamation to do the maintenance on the delivery system. Okay, then fast forward to when steelhead were thought to get onto the endangered species list. Kachuma Operation and Maintenance Board started monitoring for steelhead out in the San Ynez River. So we started doing that in '93, and we've been hard at it ever since, monitoring fish out there in the San Ynez River, basically from Lake Kachuma all the way down to the ocean. I don't know all those fish by name, but pretty close. I've got a group of 4 full-time biologists and anywhere between 3 and 4 part-time biologists that are seriously dedicated to studying steelhead, rainbow trout out in the San Ynez River and providing documentation on where they are and doing all different types of restoration projects. And the reason for that is that steelhead got listed in '97, a biological assessment was written in '99, National Marine Fisheries Service, who was in charge of keeping track on the federal level for steelhead, wrote a biological opinion to Reclamation saying, if you're going to use that water out of that river, you need to do X, Y, and Z. It's the give back to the environment. And I got the nod to work with the water districts to implement that list of tasks on behalf of Reclamation. And in 2000, we wrote a fish management plan to do all those different things. 2004, we did an EIR EIS for all the actions, the environmental coverage on a state and federal level to do all the things that were in the fish management plan. And then, of course, NIMS put out their recovery plan in 2012, which we've been following, trying to do as many of those things as what was recommended. Okay, so let's see here. Okay, great. So what does that mean on a monitoring level? Well, we do a migrant trapping out there, so we've got anywhere from 1 to 3 traps out there where we monitor fish coming in and out of the San Ynez River. We do red surveys like you saw earlier. Kyle had some shots of reds out there. We do snorkel surveys all throughout the watershed, tributaries, main stem, from the dam to the ocean. We also monitor for invasive species out there. There are quite a few of those. We do beaver dam surveys. We measure discharge, water quality. We map habitats out there. We do restoration projects, I'm going to talk about in 1 second. And then we do adaptive management. If we happen to see something out there, then we may take that on for a project. So first thing, if you're interested in steelhead, of course, you want to remove all of the anthropogenic barriers that are out there that make it difficult for them to get to their spawning habitats. So here are some areas that we've mapped on the southern side of the San Ynez watershed. And we've been systematically going out and removing those barriers out there. It's a lot of work, and it's very rewarding because you usually take a barrier out and it's instant gratification that fish show up. So we've started with out in San Miguelito. We've been working a little bit out there, Salsapuedes Creek, El Jarro Creek, a little bit in Nahoe Creek, Alisal, Kyoto, and then Hilton right up by the dam. The ones in green are the barriers that we've removed over time, over my tenure there, which is over 20 years. So we've done 21 different projects out there to facilitate fish passage or improve habitats out there. And they range from the smallest of things of doing simplistic gravel augmentation for spawning, $500 project, up to taking out a low flow crossing and putting in a bridge, which $1 million, $1.5 million to sometimes $2 million worth of a project. Our most recent projects have been 6 on Kyoto Creek and 1 on El Jarro Creek, where we fixed some elements that got washed out in the 23-24 storms, and then fixed those and then enhanced them to build in resilience for climate change, which were interesting projects. So we have a lot of experience. I personally have been at it for over 20 years doing these different things. And so I wanted to show you a few of those little projects that we worked on. Here's out on Salsapuedes Creek. We did a fish ladder that was the condition beforehand and the condition afterward. That fish ladder never clogs, has fish that lives in it in the summertime. It's an excellent project that works very well for upstream and downstream migration. El Jarro Creek, here's a big time barrier on Rancho San Julian. We put in a vertical slot fishway over to the right there. Now fish can travel in and out upstream, downstream without any trouble, and they're fish that live in the ladder during the summertime. And on Kyoto Creek, we put a lot of energy out there. We've removed 11 low flow crossings and put in bridges out there. That's what crossing 9 looked like before, and that's what it looked like afterwards. And then here's crossing 8 on the install, and what it looked like afterwards. And I have a little video. Hopefully this will work. Let's see. Uh-oh. How do I get this video to play? Help me out. Nope. Okay, Chris, this is your time to jump too. I have a little video, and maybe it will play, maybe not. This is the install of Crossing 8. It's pretty cool to see this big bridge go in here. Let's see, what are we going to do on this? We can just go forward.
It's not in the slide.
Okay, so sorry. This is a 54-foot span of a bridge that we put in there. Oh, look at that, maybe, yeah. No? How about the bottom?
He said they didn't put it in the slide rack, so it's not in there.
Oh. Okay, sorry about that.
Chris is fired.
Yeah. Okay, so let me, I'll explain it to you. So what we did was we built the foundations. That took about 2 weeks to build the foundation for the bridge. Then we brought in these prefabricated bridges that we had built off-site. They came in stretch trailers that were 1.5 lanes wide. We came all the way up this little tiny road. and we installed this bridge. There's about 18 pieces that go to it, and we put it in about 8 hours. So we went from no bridge to a bridge in a very short period of time. And then that's what it looks like today over to the right. It's super cool, really a neat project, about $1 million, $1.5 million, $1.8 million, something like that to do that type of a project. So people are going to ask me, well, what's the trend of the population out there for steelhead? And the answer to that is that, yes, there are steelhead out there. There are quite a few of them out there, but it ebbs and flows. It all depends on how much water you have going down the river, okay? And so when you have, these are all the years going back to the beginning of the biological opinion. When you have multiple wet years in a row, the population goes up. If you have multiple dry years in a row, the population goes down. And so it's very, undulates by how much water. The last 2 years, we've had 2 big spill years, and as a result, the population has gone up in a big way. So more water, more fish, less water, less fish, and that's the answer to those types of questions. Okay, and so here's some eye candy for those that like to see fish. The top left, that is a out-migrating smolt. The next one to the right is a lagoon fish that had come up, had gone down to the lagoon. It didn't go to the ocean, and then it came back up from the lagoon to spawn. We know that by reading the scales. In our migrant trapping, we take scales and tissue samples so we can get genetics off the tissue, and we read the scales, which is an arduous process, but we can then age the fish, and we know more or less where they were at and what they were up to. That's a scale right there. And that far one is a resident fish that didn't go to the ocean, but the main stem was in such good shape last year that it grew really large in the main stem, which was really interesting. That's a pretty good sized fish. This is a photograph that a lot of you I know have seen it. I see you, Lou. That is a big female last year, and that's a 23-inch fish, not quite as big as Mark's, but pretty close. And then there's a spawning pair of residents over on Hilton Creek, and so on and so forth. Okay, so what happened to my closing slide? You guys, technical problems here. Okay, so anyway, thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to your questions at the end. And we really do have steelhead, and the population is at the moment going up. Okay.
Russell, that's actually called fish porn, the pictures up there. We're going to take some questions now, 15 minutes worth or so, depending on how many questions people have. Our arrangement is to come up to these microphones on both sides of the, in front of each of the aisles, and come on down, ask your questions, and feel free to cover any base that you can think of, because you're not going to get another chance to have these experts in front of you for any length of time.
Is this on? Yeah. My question. Okay. My question is about restoration strategies. And so first I want to thank all of you. This has been great. These are great talks. But there's a controversy in the strategy for restoring steelhead. So the commonality is everybody believes in removing barriers, restoring natural flows, restoring habitat like riparian zones, and you've already talked about that. But where the dichotomy occurs is some people think you build it and they'll come. You know, these fish are adapted to huge fluctuations in flow, they've gone through droughts and floods, and they become genetically adapted to that. So they come back during those difficult times. So there is one school of thought, leave them alone and let them come back after you do all this restoration. The other school of thought is they're really rare now. Like Rosie Dadgett's study showed, only 177 adult steelhead along the South Coast over 25 years, only about 7 a year. So if there are so few, maybe they're not going to come if you build it. So that gets into assisted migration. So there are enough fish out there in some systems that you could maybe transfer fish from systems where they occur to systems where they don't, where they've been extirpated by fire, by floods, by drought. So I want to maybe start with Cal, but throw it out to all of you. How do you feel about, transferring trout between, or steelhead between systems versus just doing all these restoration activities and then leaving it alone?
Sorry, is this working? Okay. Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And I'm actually going to be addressing some of this in, you get to hear me again, or you have to hear me again for the next part. And it is a really good question because there are both schools of thought. And we do have some, at least with the Department of Fish and Wildlife in California, some short and some long-term management strategies. So we recognize that our long-term goals, right, are restoring that habitat and getting rid of those barriers. But we have seen multiple times populations that were, say, isolated in a creek and a wildfire came through and it blinked out of existence. And we can't just keep watching those populations disappear. We don't have enough of them. So we have explored not just fish rescues, but translocations where we are moving them between different watersheds. There's a lot of considerations there on, are you going to be impacting a population where fish are going? Are you going to be impacting the genetics? Can the population that's donating the fish handle losing a large amount? One concern we have is really creating a genetic bottleneck and taking a few fish and putting them in a new creek by themselves if it's not really connected to anadromy or getting that new gene flow. There have been other discussions too about ideas like growing more fish. The department runs hatcheries, right? If you've ever been to the Fillmore hatchery, you can see some of the fish that we stock, non-spawning fish in reservoirs and things. And that also runs into some problems because it leads back to that idea of if these fish don't have a habitat to go to, it doesn't matter how many you grow, you're just putting them on the landscape to die. So there's definitely a lot of opportunity in areas like you mentioned that have been extirpated or that have wildfire devastation and have recovered, and that's something that the department is doing, and I think maybe a little more aggressive with some of our translocations in the future as a way to try and build redundancy, multiple populations, and some resiliency.
So this is a FYI and a question. First of all, I'm the chairman of the Santa Barbara County Fish and Wildlife Commission. For the members, all the folks here and the like, we solicit grant proposals for fish and wildlife habitat improvement in the county. Our funds come from half the fish and wildlife fines that are collected in the county come back to the county to go into a fish and wildlife propagation fund. The commission thinks very highly, looks very favorably on steelhead restoration. Looks very highly on steelhead restoration. We look over these grants, and the ones that we vote on favorably go to the Board of Supervisors to be approved. And within 3 to 6 months, you get funding for the project in question. So anyway, there's a website in Santa Barbara County under the Fish and Wildlife Commission, Santa Barbara County Fish and Wildlife Commission. You can look in there. There's grant application forms there to look at, and you can call in to get more information. Question, the fish barrier on the Southern Pacific Railroad easement that goes over Santa Maria Ignacia Creek. Been there for a long time. It collects fish a lot. Shows you guys had pictures of electroshocking there. Is that scheduled to be augmented? I mean, I could do it with a sledgehammer in my youth and get it done in like a week. But anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Tim, did you want to answer another question? Or previous question?
Maybe I'll just jump on that question first,
Yeah.
and then I'll talk about Scott's. There is a watershed plan afoot for the whole entire Maria Ignacio, where they've studied all the barriers and now they're working on the bottommost barrier and then moving upstream. And so that railroad bridge is the second one, and it's in planning. So it's going to come. You can hang on your sledgehammer for a little bit, but maybe we'll call you when it's needed. So it's in process. And I just one little, you want to add on? Okay.
Oh, I was going to say we have some representatives here today from South Coast Habitat Restoration, which is a great local organization that does a lot of barrier removals. And I'm pretty sure the department just awarded some money for that exact barrier. So the schedule really is going to be up to Mo.
It's up to Mo, yes. Another question, this gentleman?
Let me say, I apologize if you covered this earlier, but the population health Malibu South and the population health through North County, and then more importantly up into the Central Coast. If you have addressed this, just maybe 2-4 minutes on that. But more importantly, how does that loop around impact, or does it impact the Santa Barbara County? And I guess is an interesting story with the situation in Malibu, Malibu Creek, et cetera. In what situation does Santa Barbara become I'm trying to think of the right word, a place of note where these fish will find a home in a crisis situation? I hope I articulated that properly, but it's more a question of the health of the overall system, north to south. So thank you.
All right. Sorry, I'm just talking the whole time. We within the department, we do have our California monitoring program looking for steelhead throughout Southern California. And in the areas south of Malibu and Topanga Creek, there are really very few fish and very few areas that kind of support steelhead right now. There's some populations and a lot of work being done by Cal Trout down in San Juan Creek in Orange County, and there's some big barriers there along the I-5 freeway and Arroyo Trabuco, which is kind of a popular stocked fishing creek historically that people still go to. But that's one that we're focused on restoring and maybe getting some wild fish back in. Further south, there's not as much of a robust monitoring program. We just don't have the resources to be looking everywhere. We do have a population on the Santa Margarita River. Again, Cal Trout's doing a big barrier project there. But these are very small, isolated populations. When it comes to kind of the influence or the impact of some of the northern areas, I mean, Tim can comment on this too, but a lot of times these fish, they tend to return to their natal streams where they were born, but not always. They can stray and go to other watersheds. And we believe that historically there was this kind of gene flow between different watersheds within Southern California, or even mixing with Central or South Central California. And there is the ability there with that kind of life flexibility where you have a devastating event or a wildfire or a multi-year drought, and maybe a small creek or river does become extirpated. And then it can be recolonized by, say, these strays from the San Ynez River. So having those big source populations in Santa Barbara County really is going to benefit the populations further south.
Maybe I'll just provide a little data. Straying is really a viable activity that happens for steelhead to keep the gene pool strong. So that fish that I showed you earlier, the 608 millimeter fish, that fish genetically typed to the San Luis Obispo area, or Arroyo Grande Creek to be specific. So you can see how it happens. They stray and move down. Every year when we have good flow year and the ocean connectivity is happening, we do get fish that come from other places. Not a lot, but some. I think that's way less going around Point Conception and going into the Southern California Bight. That's a real problem down here in the south. To get at Scott's question earlier, the idea was that there were a bunch of little tiny watersheds that had populations in each, so if one got extirpated, then the other would help repopulate that stream. But when you wipe out so many of them and there's only a couple left, with fish, it makes it very, very difficult to recolonize and to come around Point Conception. So my hope is that we can continue to produce as many fish as possible in the San Ynez, and hopefully that get the message to go left, go south, and come around and help out. But if not, then the translocation option is something we really should think about.
Okay, we'll alternate here with the speakers here, so.
Can somebody talk about what the steelhead do out in the ocean? It's always, I've been curious about it, and I haven't really gotten a whole lot of answers on what do we know, what do we don't know? I mean, where do they go?
They talk about us a lot. Who's our ocean expert here? Here we go. Go ahead.
Man, this audience, you have amazing questions. That is really great question, and that is a huge data gap. We don't really know. Honestly, we can see how certain ocean conditions can impact populations if they have a really high ocean survivability because the conditions are amenable to them, or there's good food sources, or if we have really poor ocean conditions, and we're seeing and we've seen across the state, the populations react to that, either up or down. I did see a paper, a couple of years ago, some people put some small GPS tags on fish that were going out. And if you remember, these smolts that are going out to the ocean, they're maybe 130 millimeters long. These aren't big fish, so you can't put, a big honking GPS unit on them. And it was a limited amount of data, and I remember seeing this map of these fish just scattering. There were some that were going up and down the coast, hundreds or thousands of miles. There were some that were going just out into the middle of the ocean. Yeah, it's pretty incredible. I know too, there was some recent studies in the Big Sur coast where they were trying to figure out where these fish came from, right? And they were doing what they call otolith microchemistry. So they were looking at this little bone that's in the ear of the fish, and they were looking at different concentrations of certain minerals and chemicals and things like that. And they could say, hey, this concentration is found in this watershed versus this watershed. And I remember the majority of the fish they found came from outside of Big Sur, and there were some that came down from Klamath. So just as an idea of that fish went out from Klamath, and it showed up in Big Sur. Okay. How it got there, I don't know if it went straight down or around or what.
Let's take one more question, hopefully brief, and we got to go to our next group before it gets too late. Please keep your question, and we'll address it either at the next 15, and then we'll, or at the very end.
Well, I'm honored to have the last question. This is primarily for Nakia. I was really interested to hear about, you said we have a word for salmon because it existed, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about the interplay of salmon and steelhead with your, in the ancient times. It feels ancient, but it's not really, but I just feel like steelhead had been gone for so long, or not have been as plentiful as before, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about that experience or that knowledge that you heard about, because it feels like they've been gone for way too long, and hearing a little bit more about the interplay of those two species is really interesting. Thanks.
Is that working there?
Yes, no, thank you for that question. When we talk about our connections, and I reference, through our ancestors and through those stories, I think, besides that, we have just how we lived on the land. And I mentioned how my father took us down to the river, or he went down to the river to fish. So, really our connections is through, as a child, going down to the river and seeing these species in the water. I think today, as we navigate this issue, and we go back again, and we are constantly changing our lenses of how we view. Again, you have to remember, for many tribes throughout the nation, we're still in a time of a renaissance. So we're continuing to go back to the ancestors and do these new practices to us today, but really the ancestors left that for us. So when I talk about the estuaries and the rivers, and so we have the stories that growing up and having access to water, and back then it was a lot more. What we know for sure through our traditional stories is that this place here was always, drought was always an issue. So, my grandmother talks about a time when they had to go to the ocean to go get whale blubber to live off of. It was a great famine that happened here. A lot of people died during that time. So, you know, accessing these different waters and areas for sustenance and the ability to live. So when we talk about water, we talk about how water's life. So, you know, I wish I could give you more, but that's all I can really give you for now. But what we know is that the work is being done, and it continues through our constant access to our ancestors, their stories, and you know, how she describes the land is so important.
Nakia, is that a lot of that information available at the Natural History Museum?
No, it's not. But I have great news. Our museum will be opening soon. So
Okay.
we'd love to see people come up and visit our new museum.
Oh, that'd be great.
And we're hoping to host, yeah, thank you. We're hoping to host, you know, additional talks on subjects like this.
That'd be
'Cause
great.
It's very important. And again, this is great being on a panel with all these gentlemen here. But I want you to know, these aren't normal spaces we occupy. So a gathering of us together really signifies a change. And I think it's very important, you know, bringing in tribes to have this discussion. This isn't a new concept now. You did this work up north,
Yeah,
you know, taking
exactly.
down that, you know, the dam up there. So we know the Hoopa, the Karuk, and the Yurok. You know, they have been accessing these rivers, and this has been a strong part of their culture for a long time. Now, I'm not saying it isn't part of ours, but each tribe has been impacted by colonization differently. And we have to recognize that. So, you know, so I'm really excited at the future and looking into these areas and hyper-focusing and how we can bring traditional ecological knowledge with current science and how we can make a difference for the future.
Bit of full circle. Thank you. Well, we haven't had enough of Kyle Evans, so he will be our first speaker. Can we save the historic Santa Barbara fish? Hopefully this is an optimistic side. Okay. Give it to him.
All right.
So before Kyle starts, I just want to let everybody know, I know we're running a little bit behind schedule, so we'll do our best up here to pick up the pace a little bit. But we don't want to miss anything either.
All right. Well, cool. Thank you. All right, I can rip the Band-Aid off first and say, yes, we can save Steelhead, and we're going to. So we'll don't keep you in suspense. All right, so, and there's going to be a lot of things in here that we've kind of touched on a little bit earlier through the Q&As or other presentations, so I'll try to keep it a little, not waste time and try to keep it high level. As Tim talked about earlier, you know, this species was listed under the Federal Endangered Species Act in 1997. That range was expanded a little bit later from, it originally went from Santa Maria to Malibu, and then it was put down to the US-Mexico border. More recently, there was an effort by CalTrout petitioned the California Department of Fish and Wildlife to list the species under the California Endangered Species Act, and that started in 2001. We ended up doing a total status review of the species and their population throughout their range, and very recently, it was in 2024, the commission accepted the final listing to say, yes, this is a California endangered species now. One of the reasons we did that, and I know we're talking about Santa Barbara County, but I just wanted to show a little perspective from the whole extent of the range, right? This is the southern distinct population segment that goes from your Santa Maria River in the north down to the US-Mexico border. And the green highlights areas that are still kind of open to fish, where the red indicates areas that are behind dams or barriers. And I just wanted to show how much area really is not accessible. And this is kind of a crude drawing as well. I mean, if you look, this is showing green around the LA River and the San Gabriel River. And if you've ever been there, it's not what I would call habitat. We also have a couple maps, even from more Santa Barbara County, where we're seeing, you know, this is from a CMAR document where they were looking at historic occupation. And, you know, blue is where we think they might be currently, red was historic, and then there's kind of this checker pattern showing areas that these fish no longer are above dams. So we've been talking a lot about barriers, but it is a big issue. And these issues come in all shapes and sizes. We have everything from what we call total barriers, which block all fish from moving up or downstream, something like your big Matilaha Dam here. We have things that are maybe partial barriers, which block maybe some small fish moving up and down, but maybe a big fish can. And then we have temporal barriers, which are ones that are, as the name indicates, based on the time, the amount of flow. So when we talked about kind of those flashy systems earlier, what happens is you might have a big storm, you might have high winter flows, and that's not really a barrier. You're a fish, you're swimming right up, you don't notice that drop. But then as that flows, kind of drops back down, now you've got this big, for example, this is that pool on Maria Ignacio we were just talking about out in Goleta, where this is definitely a temporal barrier, but very small amount of time fish can get over that. Another major focus of our restoration is the habitat, right? I talked about how having high quality habitat is important for their survival, and we do end up with things like your LA River here with huge channelization. We also end up with a huge amount of invasive species like this bullfrog, or even these catfish here that I think we actually scooped out of the San Ynez River. I was helping Tim out. But in addition to kind of those invasive species, we are looking, we're also concerned about kind of the quality of the habitat, whether you have kind of these maybe drying, straight, uniform channels that even when there's water there, they might not really serve very much to help steelhead, right? They're maybe not have cover or might have deep pools or runs or things like that, complexity that they need. Or you have, the same thing with your water use. You're getting these areas that are completely drying out. So it's that kind of approach where you have to look at it from, it's not just removing the concrete, but it's trying to restore that habitat to something that really will benefit fish and other native species. As I mentioned a little in the Q&A, as a Department of Fish and Wildlife, we have kind of some short-term and some long-term management actions that we can take. The short-term and some of the Band-Aid fixes do come in the way of fish rescues. So these are typically we're trying to protect against some specific event, whether it's a drought or a wildfire or an oil spill or something like this. For example, this is one of our creeks on the Conception Coast, and I just wanted to point out during the kind of worst of the drought, in a single year, this went from an area that was about 98% wetted, and this is a couple miles of creek from the ocean to basically a barrier at the top. Over the course of that year, that dropped from 98 to 38% wetted. So that's a huge contraction of habitat. And there are fish that were trapped in all of these little areas that were drying. And one of the ways that we were able to keep them from expiring was grabbing them and either moving them to other habitat within this creek or somewhere nearby. When we do that, it's important to protect those populations during these events so that they can, when we get water back or when we do restoration, then they can, reproduce and succeed, but also protecting those important genetics. We're not losing these native fish that are just gone forever. Usually we like to keep fish in the same watershed, and the reason for that I alluded to a little bit earlier is that when you are doing something like a translocation and you're moving fish between watersheds, another something that we can do is there's a lot of considerations about the impacts either to where you're taking fish from, so that donor population, is that population going to be okay if you take out a couple hundred fish? Most of the time not. The recipient population, where you're putting them, can that habitat support fish? Are there fish already there? Are we worried about mixing the genetics with maybe native wild fish versus some hatchery-influenced fish? Are we concerned about spreading pathogens from one creek to another that normally wouldn't be able to make that kind of shift? But really, the benefits are, like I mentioned, kind of starting that new population in some cases, right? And building that redundancy of having multiple fish in multiple creeks in case another big event shows up. And there are a lot of considerations that go into this. We do species surveys, we do a bunch of habitat surveys, and we try to do some long-term monitoring because the last thing we want to do is take these fish, well, what's the saying, out of the frying pan and into the fire. So there's no point moving them from one dry creek to another. Sometimes we do both. So recently, if you may or may not have seen in the news, we did a relocation as a result of the Palisades fire. Topanga Creek down in Malibu was very burned, huge amount of devastation from a biological perspective, but also a community perspective, and all the homes and devastation that occurred there was awful. And we basically went in and we grabbed the fish that were in Topanga Creek. This was kind of the southernmost stronghold of steelhead within Southern California. We're within this creek. And we moved them because we have seen in the past, particularly after the Thomas Fire or the Alisol Fire, that your big ash-laden debris flows that follow a wildfire can wipe out an entire population. You get this really awful water quality, you get all this material and rocks and sediment moving down, and you kind of just choke out and wash out these fish. So we didn't want that to happen to Topanga. We went and we electrofished them and grabbed them. And I want to say thank you to, I think I see at least 5 people here from the Department of Fish and Wildlife and some of my staff in Santa Barbara that are probably in these pictures, but great work to all of you. You were out there on the ground doing it. We moved them to the Fillmore Hatchery. We had a kind of set aside spot, and our plan originally was, hey, we'll keep them here for a couple weeks or months, and then we'll put them back in Topanga. But that first storm really devastated Topanga Creek. It's just an extremely narrow, steep channel that it burned really down to the water. And after seeing it, we kind of realized it's going to take years for this watershed to recover. We can't put fish back there now. They're not going to survive. So instead of holding them in the hatchery for a number of years, and that has its own problems with, are they going to be okay? Are they eating? Are they going to lose their fitness? They're getting used to the resort life and their pellets. They can't handle the wild anymore. So we ended up moving them actually to Arroyo Hondo Creek here in Santa Barbara County. And this was a creek where it supported fish for a very long time leading up to the Alisol Fire in 2021. And then the debris flows following Alisol ended up wiping it out, and over the last couple years, it's kind of recovered. So it was really in a place where it could support fish in the habitat and the food source and the water quality and all those things that we look for. So our long-term goals are the things that we've been talking about, right? It comes to our restoration of how can we remove barriers. I think this one was actually done by South Coast Habitat Restoration too, over in on Davy Brown Creek, which is a tributary to Manzana over in the San Ynez, not Santa Maria. Sorry, these things. But really, it's about that kind of barrier removal and habitat restoration and restoring the natural processes. So restoring those natural flow regimes and also letting rivers do what rivers do, you know, moving sediment, meandering back and forth, scouring out areas. My role with the department is that I serve primarily with that kind of, you know, funding and permitting. Like, we're regulators. So we really rely on a lot of these other groups, like Tim's group, where we can support them in their applications and say, okay, well, here, we'll help pay for this recovery effort. And we've got a few different, you know, funding sources or propositions that the people of California voted to approve. A lot of times, too, it's not just our removing a barrier. Sometimes we like to focus on what we call process-based restoration, and this idea is that you're using more of the natural processes to help support that recovery in that watershed. You know, we've got these kind of little chart here looking at different stages of a river, you know, from 0 to 8. And basically the idea is that when you have kind of a single narrow channel that's cut down and incised, it's not really acting like a normal river. That's not really a healthy river. It's not connected to the floodplain. It's not meandering around. It doesn't have your different types of habitat in it. So there are different ways to try and bring that back. And one of them, you know, pictured in this diagram is looking at something called beaver dam analogs. But essentially the idea is that you're trying to slow down the water. You're trying to create some erosion. You want it moving left and right, not just up and down. The idea is that you are trying to increase your infiltration, let water soak into the ground, raise that groundwater table. Instead of having this one little narrow channel, having something that is more meandering and kind of a mix of habitat that can support steelhead, but also other species. A part of all of this, right, is if we're doing the work, we want to make sure it's working. So we partner with Tim and his organization a lot. They do tons of monitoring in the San Ynez River. We do a lot of monitoring outside of that in other areas. And the idea is that if we take out a barrier, are fish responding? If we improve habitat, are they doing better? So can we save them? Yes. There's some big projects Russell's going to talk about. Really, when it comes down to having everyone here today in the community, it really is getting the support from you, from restoration practitioners, from our local governments, and yeah, just that public support. A lot of these projects happened on private land, and we need that support from those landowners or getting in contact with us. So yeah, there's a lot to do, but there's a lot of people trying to get it done. Thank you.
Yeah, go for it.
Afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming out today. I think you guys being here is the most important thing. All these incredible speeches, presentations, I probably rewrote my speech like 5 times, listening to everyone talk. So I'm gonna try and cover some stuff pretty high level to give you a sense of what we're doing on the ground. But you being here today to be informed, engaged, and empowered is the most important thing we can do. We need to have people out there moving this fish, moving these important projects into the everyday conversation, and understanding that this fish represents the integrity and the function of landscapes at scale. And as this fish goes, we go. And so protecting this fish is going to create ecologic uplift for a whole other group of native species, but it's also going to create community resilience for us as well. And so I just think that that's an important takeaway, and I appreciate you guys being here today to talk about this stuff with us. So I'm Russell Marlowe. I'm regional manager for Cal Trout in our Ventura office. And we're focused on protecting and conserving native salmonids throughout the whole state of California. I particularly am tasked with trying to protect and recover southern steelhead, pretty much from Los Angeles all the way up to Santa Maria. And we do that through science, policy, restoration, and engagement. Just real quick about Cal Trout, statewide nonprofit focused on revitalizing waters and resilient wild fish for a better California, balancing fish, water, and people. Squaring human economy with our human ecology is the most important thing we can do, thinking about how to restore processes at scale, and how do we bring the built environment into that equation to better position it to allow for these landscapes to operate properly. 63 people, 9 offices, 74 active projects, 121 partners. And that's the other important thing today. Everyone on this stage represents a partner that's doing this work. We can't do this stuff alone. We only have so much capacity as one organization, and we got to rely on other people doing this work to really create the redundancy of the populations we need to have the population level impact that we're hoping to see with the species to prevent the extinction. And while I appreciate Kyle's positivity, I also want to put a little hair on fire. This species is critically endangered. The threat of extinction is real, next 10 to 25 years. And so we need to be doing these projects yesterday, really, to see the impact we want to have and to ensure that this species exists. I mean, we're making decisions now, resource management decisions, that aren't for us. This is for future generations, and that's the most important thing to think about when we're doing this work. Is of course, is shade of trees that we will not enjoy, and that's how we need to operate, how we need to think. 7 generations. These rivers, these fish are our brothers, our sisters, our mother. We are so connected to this species that we need to be doing everything they can to prevent the extinction. So I'm going to talk real quick about the strategies that we use and Cal Trout and working with our partners to ensure that we can prevent this extinction. One of them is protect the best. As Kyle mentioned, we use this particularly in the policy world. We used the California Endangered Species Act to have the species listed as endangered within the state, recognizing that there's a potential for some pretty drastic change at the federal level, and that we wanted to ensure that California's history of environmental advocacy and protection is in place at the highest level in the state, and so that's why we proceeded, and we're successful. It was a unanimous decision by the Fish and Game Commission to list this species endangered. It happened in 2024. I think an important thing to do here, and if you're looking for an immediate action, write your elected officials and ask them to fully fund CDFW to write a recovery plan for the species. They need to have the funding directly appointed to them to write that plan, and that's a critical step for us to have the best science, the stakeholder engagement, and the recovery actions necessary as prescribed by the state to see this species prevent the extinction of this species. And so I'd ask you to do that today. That's an immediate request to you guys. Next would be integrating wild fish and working landscapes. Like I said, balancing fish, water, and people, bringing our existence into a more reciprocal relationship with the environment, something that's been out of whack since day one. And so really thinking about, particularly about the idea that restoration is also cultural restoration as well. You know, we have only been here a short time, and there are people that have occupied this land in memoriam, and we need to really think about the understanding and knowledge that they have and bring that into how we're operating on the landscape. Steward source waters. So a lot of people, they think steward source waters, they think snow-capped peaks in the Sierras, Northern California. For us, that's groundwater aquifers, right? That's where our source waters come from, and they're critically overdrafted all up and down the coast. And so we need to be acting to protect those aquifers, to do every action we can to not only conserve water, but to resupply those locations with the input they need. A lot of that comes to setting back levees, opening the lateral connectivity of streams so they can get back onto the floodplain. And again, another action. If you want to talk to an elected official, tell them that in-stream flow is a groundwater-dependent ecosystem. They routinely always don't include the idea that summer base flows and in-stream flow is directly connected to groundwater aquifers. And so that is something that we need to be pushing forward and advocating for constantly to ensure that we're protecting not only southern steelhead, but native fish and riparian corridors as well. Restore estuaries. We have very few intact estuaries left in Southern California. We live very close to one in San Ynez, incredible resources, critical habitat type for southern steelhead, and a whole host of other endangered and listed species. And so we really need to be restoring estuaries and protecting those estuaries that still exist. That's it can't be stressed enough as the interface between the ocean and the headlands or the headwaters. And then the one that I'm going to touch on the most right now is reconnecting habitat, both longitudinally from the headwaters to the ocean, but also laterally across the floodplain. As we heard on here, the biggest driver of the extinction risk for the species is the loss of access to critical habitat, particularly moving up into the headwaters. And so CalTrout is pursuing a whole host of projects up and down the coast to try and reconnect habitat for southern steelhead. I'm going to take you guys on a quick tour of a number of projects that we're pursuing, but some of these are CalTrout-led, others we're partnered with other agencies and organizations that are leading these projects, but this speaks to the question we had and also some of the conversations about genetics, and I recognize that many of us here are particularly interested in the Santa Barbara, San Ynez region. We need to create multiple, resilient, viable populations throughout the native range to ensure that we protect from those catastrophic losses of populations and to create that flow of genetics that is uniquely important to the livelihood of this species. Southern steelhead are the most courageous and most creative fish on the west coast of North America. They exist from cactus in Tijuana all the way up to conifers in the Russian Peninsula. And this species of all of them is the most highly adaptive. It swims farther, it jumps higher, it can exist in warmer water. This species is vital to the long-term existence of steelhead on the west coast of North America. We need to make sure that we think about that when we're pursuing the projects that we need to put on the ground yesterday. So we'll shoot down to the Santa Margarita River. This is a project going into implementation this summer. It's going to be the first fully connected Core 1 watershed within the DPS, or the distinct population segment for the species. And this is a huge accomplishment. So this project's been in planning for 10 years. We're going to remove these 8 box culverts and then put a single span bridge that's going to both open up lateral connectivity across the floodplain, but also longitudinal connectivity. This is a bit of an augmented system because you can see at the base is Camp Pendleton, and they have a water input up in the headwaters to ensure that they have continued water access within the military base. But all at the same time, it kind of creates like a hatchery, conservation hatchery environment for the species. And so this project going to implementation is a huge success for the species. Cruising up the coast a little bit, as Kyle mentioned, is the Trabuco Creek I-5 Metrolink Passage Restoration and Invasive Species Management Program. This, again, is going to be a critical step in recovery of the species. We have 100% plans in place, permits ready to go, working on building the funding package to implement this. And as you guys can see in this photo right now, out of frame below is the Metrolink, and then you're looking at 10 lanes of traffic on the I-5 corridor there. And so we're trying to move fish from below here to above. Specifically, it is important to notice here that above here, where it curves up and to the right, is Cleveland National Forest. The National Forest over the past 10 years has removed 88 check dams up there, creating the opportunity and the space for the species to move back into those habitats. And the lowest barrier, remaining barrier, is this right here on the I-5 lanes in San Juan Capistrano. And so we're getting ready to implement a solution here. It's a technical fishway. It's going to be process-based as much as possible, but it's going to restore access to Cleveland National Forest and a whole bunch of recently reopened critical habitat for the species. Malibu Creek Ecosystem Restoration Project, the centerpiece of which is Ringe Dam removal. This one right here is historic, transformative landscape scale restoration to have population level impact. Removing Ringe Dam will open up 15 miles of habitat, 75% of which is under federal or state public control. And so areas that are going to remain open and accessible to the species. Right now, working with state parks, they own the dam, they're leading the project. We're in the process of putting together the plans by 2028 to begin the removal of Malibu Creek, or Ringe Dam, the restoration of Malibu Creek. This project actually is about, is watershed wide when you consider in addition to removing Ringe Dam, we're going to remediate 8 upstream passage barriers as well. And so we truly are creating critical habitat opportunities, not only for southern steelhead, but Pacific lamprey, restoring access or flow of sediment to the coastal zone for native species, tidewater goby, but also behind Ringe Dam is 800,000 cubic yards of sediment that's supposed to be downstream, supposed to be on our beaches, in our near shore environment. And so this is climate crisis, sea level rise resiliency as well. And so multi-species, multi-benefit projects. A little bit further up the coast, coming back to our neck of the woods, is 2 projects being led out of my office, the Harvey Diversion Fish Passage Restoration Project, and then the Rose Valley Creek Ecosystem Restoration Project. Harvey Diversion on Santa Paula Creek, we're in the process right now of moving towards final designs and permits. Hope to be implementing this project by 2027. We're open 12 miles of habitat for southern steelhead in the Santa Clara River. Santa Clara River is a core 1 watershed, but also a stronghold for the species. Of all the watersheds in Southern California, the Santa Clara River retains the most of its natural character, particularly because of Los Padres National Forest. It makes up the majority of the headwaters. And so we have an amazing opportunity in this. What's that? Oh, Los Padres National Forest. Sorry, I put Los Padres and Los Angeles together. We have an incredible opportunity here to restore access to what is actually like kind of a crazy stream in Southern California, Santa Paula Creek. You would think it was in Northern California. It's perennial running. It has incredible habitat, highest quality habitat for southern steelhead in the Santa Clara River. And then Rose Valley is an important project, removing 4 fish passage barriers and 3 man-made lakes. I'm going to restore only a small amount of access to critical habitat, but it's particularly important critical habitat. It's over summering pools. And so very much like Kyle talked about, the different habitat types that are used by different developmental stages of the species throughout its life cycle, the loss of over summering pool habitat has been a critical component of the extinction threat that this species faces. And so we're moving towards implementation of this project hopefully in 2028. And the critical partner there has been Los Padres National Forest. Coming up to another transformative project, historic landscape level change opportunity, is Matilaha Dam. Above Matilaha is 33 miles of habitat, all within Los Padres National Forest. And so, again, a derelict, defunct dam, serves no purpose, has no flood control capacity, has no storage capacity, is ready to be removed, is ready to be removed since 2000 when they had a plan in place. But now is the time. We have 60% plans for dam removal, moving towards final plans by 2027, looking to try and get the dam out by 2030. Recently, the Division of Dam Safety said it has to be out by 2035 regardless. And so truly, you know, we have an endpoint in sight, but we want to make that happen as quick as possible. What a lot of people don't think about Matilaha Dam is that all the communities that grew up in the shadow of the dam were built with the idea of an altered and controlled river. And so we have to do a bunch of downstream infrastructure updating to prepare for a restored and natural river to move through this. And so a lot of it is raising levees, modernizing diversion structures, infiltration galleries, and then also building bigger bridges. And so we're in the process of doing that now. But truly, this is trying to expedite and speed up this process to make that 2030 date for removal. And so again, in our backyards is large dam removal. With the Klamath dams coming out, the next place that large dam removal, some of the largest infrastructure projects and watershed restoration projects in North America is going to be Matilaha Dam and Ringe Dam. And so we have the opportunity to see that work done in our backyard to save a species that we care about very much. And then coming back to the Santa Ynez, we've heard a bunch about Bradbury Dam, Lake Cachuma. The good work that Cal Trout has done with EDC to secure ecologic flow releases for this, but ultimately we need to see a passage solution at this location. 75% of the headwater habitat is beyond Cachuma Dam, and truly for us to see any kind of opportunity to restore viable populations of southern steelhead in San Ynez, we need to restore access to that habitat for the species. And then Zaca Creek, thinking about the impact and the length of time it'll take to get a passage solution at Bradbury Dam, we need to be doing all we can to restore viable and accessible habitat in the lower watershed. Tim with Cachuma Board Operations does a great job of that, and we're going to hear shortly from Derek Kohler with the Kohler Winery, because they recognized they had a passage barrier on their land, and they wanted to see a restoration of that. And so that is a great example of the public-private partnerships that we need to have to see these restoration projects on the ground. I think that I was all of it, sped through it. Got it done, of course.
That was an amazing amount of information. I'm encouraged, incredibly encouraged. Okay, Derek Kohler. This is a family that has recognized what we've just seen is the macro, and then now is the micro. And this is as important to getting it all done as we've all learned here in the last hour or so.
So just a little bit about the winery. Small family-owned winery located outside of Los Olivos, out on Fox and Canyon Road. We're dedicated to organic farming. We try to dry farm as much as our vineyard as possible too to conserve water. So if you're ever out in the area, feel free. Just a couple pictures of the property to start here. So I'm not a fish expert by any means, but I did grow up on the vineyard where Zaca Creek runs directly through. Historically, year-round spring-fed stream originates near Zaca Lake from springs in the mountains and flows into the San Ynez River. There's always been a population of trout in the stream. As a kid, I remember our vineyard manager telling me, back in the 70s, they were abundant. But with the past few years, with all the heavy rains we've gotten, I've noticed a lot more fish making their way downstream. Unfortunately, there are several barriers preventing them from swimming back upstream. One of the biggest being a bridge built in the 1960s on our property. You can see it right there. It's a steep 100-foot concrete runway blocking passage, leaving them stranded in pools below.
That bunch of concrete is on an angle of about this. It's unbelievable.
Super steep.
You could barely walk up that, and several of us slipped.
Yeah, it's so in 2023, I contacted Fish and Wildlife, and after seeing, over a dozen large fish stuck in the large pool that's right below there, that's where the fish were stuck. And then the same thing happened in 2024. There was fish stuck all the way below that barrier there. And last year, they began relocating. From my understanding, I talked to one of the teams that was relocating, and one day they moved like over 100 small fish from that area below stream there. Before moving them, you can see in the picture there, they took genetic samples by clipping their fins, and then they just recently got those back, including that they were entirely wild genetics, meaning they've never come from a hatchery or been introduced from elsewhere, which makes them even more of a conservation priority. Fish and Wildlife recommended I talk to Russell from Cal Trout, which you guys just heard from, and to see if they'd be interested in help address the issue on the property. After many meetings, we decided to move forward. Our goal is to work with California Trout to find a solution for the bridge, improve fish passage, create better habitat, mitigate erosion. We hope to see this project come to life within the next 5 years or so, and spark interest from our neighbors and hopefully be open to doing the same thing, as there are other barriers on the creek as well. More broadly, much of the restoration work needed in Santa Barbara County has to happen from private landowners. It's crucial for landowners to recognize the importance of participating in efforts like this. Ranchers, vineyard owners in particular, play a huge role in restoration projects. While our project is just a small step, it takes many small efforts to create meaningful change, and hopefully there can be a lot more projects like this that happen here in Santa Barbara County.
Short, sweet, and essential. Next, we have Nate Irwin, Santa Barbara Channel Keepers, local steelhead artist, local advocate for ocean and fishery health. Go for it. Yeah.
Wow, it's so great to look out here and see all these steelhead enthusiasts. Makes me feel pretty good to know that I'm not alone. And looking at this distinguished panel, I grew up here in Santa Barbara and was fortunate enough to get to go and explore the tide pools, surf the perfect point breaks, and go up into our creeks. And one of my favorite memories is actually heading up. You can see me, a little tow-headed kid here. I would go up with my dad in his 1992 Ford F-150, and we'd go fish for planters at Red Rock. And the fact that we could just drive 25 minutes from our house on the mesa and be up there immediately was so cool. And it was way better than driving 7 hours to the Eastern Sierras to go fish for planters. And little did I know as a kid that there was once this incredible abundance of fish in my own backyard. And thinking about what I lost out on is kind of hard to take, but that's why we're doing this work. Maybe one day we could see fish in this watershed. And it actually took me about 32 years to come back and go to school, and actually an environmental advocacy class and a mural really enlightened me on what I was missing. And I saw this mural by Roger Cook. It was up in Lompoc. It's no longer there. But it's a gentleman holding a huge steelhead at Surf Beach. And I've been to Surf Beach, and I didn't know that there were fish there. No idea that there were fish there, and not to mention this incredible abundance of fish. I mean, we've already seen all the stringers and talked about the impacts. And I really wanted to know more. And my incredible professor, Jeff Phillips, introduced me to Russell and Brian here on the stage. And I got to learn about the history and about the impacts of Bradbury Dam and Jameson Reservoir and Gibraltar Dam, and how all of these dams and our water delivery system really impacted this species and dropped their numbers by 99%, cut off 2/3 of their spawning habitat, like Russell said, the best spawning habitat. Places like we're still at Hunkel Dam here. Let's get down to Bradbury, and then places like Santa Cruz Creek here in the upper reaches of the watershed that had perennial flow. And at the time, I felt pretty overwhelmed to think about this conservation issue. And you've heard the statistics and the knowledge that these people have. And coming into the education field later in life and trying to be an advocate is a difficult task and a difficult plank to walk when you're trying to make that first step into advocacy. And I really wanted to know how I could help the fish. Like, what can I do? What can I add to this conservation issue? And I came across this quote. It's better to light a candle than to curse the darkness. And you got to start somewhere. You got to start by doing something. And maybe not for me. Maybe I'll never see a steelhead run in the kind of abundance that we saw in the past. But maybe my nephews or my daughter might have the chance to see these fish in the numbers that we're hoping to see with the work that the fly fishers are doing and all of these incredible other organizations and state agencies are doing. So I started working with my dad. My dad is an incredible artist. He's here in the crowd. We've got our paintings out front. And we started painting using my dad's squeegee technique, which is a really tumultuous and chaotic environment that I thought would fit perfectly well for steelhead art. And juxtaposing a steelhead, finding a steelhead was such a powerful thing to do. We would do one pass of the paint, using the squeegee technique and have this environment. And then we'd step back and we'd look at this painting and say, hey, do you see a fish in there? And it's pretty symbolic of what we're doing here today. We're trying to create this environment. We're removing barriers. We're rehabilitating habitat. We're protecting habitat that's still there so that we can see this fish come back. And ultimately, this is the result that we did. And we ended up creating a whole series of these paintings. The series is called Bygone, and it represents the era gone by of the Santa Ynez River before Bradbury Dam, when there was this incredible abundance, and also serves as a placeholder that we can look at and say, hey, one day I'd like to see those runs return. And not only just because it'd be really wonderful to see those fish, but because of what those fish mean. They're an indicator species. They indicate the health of our watersheds. And through this initiative, we started this this group called Illuminate Conservation, where we raise awareness about endangered species. And the first species we took on was Southern California steelhead and the issue of Bradbury Dam. And we started a petition along with the help of others, and that petition was meant to ask the Bureau of Reclamation to do a fish passage study over Bradbury Dam and also to ensure that the fish below the dam remain in good health. And to date, that petition has over 41,000 signatures. And we also have been able to sell these pieces. You know, believe it or not, people do want big steelhead art in their house. So we've sold several of these pieces and have been able to raise over $20,000 to support organizations that are working to protect steelhead habitat. And along the way, we've engaged with students and really gotten them involved in this as well, because the community gathering, what we're doing here today, like Russell was saying, is so important. And also just educating the next generation and empowering them and giving them something that's physical that they can take home to their parents, they can talk to their friends about it, and they can continue this advocacy on through the next generation. And this is a community event we had a couple years ago, and those kids were able to have their art up with professional artists, and we were able to gather a whole group of conservation experts and have this discussion. And it's so wonderful to see the fly fishers continuing the momentum that's been going on for decades here in trying to protect and restore and rehabilitate steelhead and their habitats. So this student in particular, the one in the middle, was so fired up about steelhead that he went home and he painted, way outside the context of the assignment, he painted, 10, 20 steelhead, and he'd bring him into class and be like, hey, look at this one, look at this one. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so amazing. And he actually went on to start his own fly fishing club at La Colina this last year. And I had the opportunity to go to talk to his club members and teach them about the San Ynez River system, teach them about Southern California steelhead and their importance. And it was just a really great example of advocacy in action, and seeing one kid take the message and run with it and start his own fly fishing club. So I work for Santa Barbara Channel Keeper, and I'm their policy associate. And along with our wonderful team, we work to protect and restore the Santa Barbara Channel and its watersheds through science-based advocacy, education, field work, and enforcement. And this work allows for us to really focus on protecting steelhead, not just because they're a species in decline, but also because of the fact that they're a critical indicator of the health of our watersheds. And our work focuses on all the way out to the Channel Islands, from Point Conception all the way down to the Ventura River. And this work focuses on really protecting that habitat that impacts the entire steelhead life cycle, from the headwaters all the way down to the ocean. And one of our programs is the Goleta Water Quality Monitoring Program. And this allows for decision makers to actually see data from these creeks that flow into the Goleta Slough and actually make decisions based on real-time data. Another issue that we've been working on for the past 20 years is our Ventura River advocacy. We're working to ensure that there's flows in the Ventura River. And this section here is actually the wet reach of the lower Ventura River. It's an area called Foster Park, which it had a historical abundance of steelhead. And it was continuously being pumped completely dry. And our work has actually led to that section of river having flows again. And we're working to ensure that those flows are increased and that those flows remain, not just for people, but also you can see that middle section, people swim in this section. This is a public trust resource that people have the right to go and access. And again, these historical photos are maddening, but they're there, and it's pretty cool to see, and something that we can work towards. Another amazing thing that Channel Keeper do is we do, education of our youth and community engagement. And since 2002, we have educated 41,000 students here in Santa Barbara County. And yeah, that's our amazing education director, Penny Owens. She's a local legend, and she's here. Oh, hi, Penny. Sorry. Another amazing program we have is our Watershed Brigade, where we go out and engage the community, get people out in our creeks, on our beaches. Yesterday we had one on the west side where we're just going and picking up trash there. But since 2020, we've been able to remove 47,500 pounds of trash from our local creeks, beaches, and watersheds along with our partners. We work with the EDC doing this work as well. So really wonderful to see that kind of work go down. But I really want to stress something. You know, we've been talking a lot about barrier removal and, you know, and allowing for access to these, you know, vernal pools to their spawning habitat, and that's incredibly important, and, you know, it can't be overstated. But one thing we really need to keep in mind is the fact that we do have functioning watersheds here in Santa Barbara in the city, and it's really important to make sure that we protect those areas before they end up, like, you don't have to look very far. You can look in Los Angeles. They're spending hundreds of millions of dollars to right the wrongs of the past, to remove concrete, to restore the ecological function of their watersheds. And we have an opportunity to support things like this. You know, the Creek Buffer Ordinance is proposing a 50-foot buffer along all of our creeks, and it's pretty shocking that we already don't have that. Carpinteria has a 50-foot setback, Goleta has a 100-foot setback, but here in Santa Barbara, we only have a 25-foot setback on Mission Creek. So this is an opportunity. You have until March 24th if you'd like to engage on this issue. Another issue that we're looking at right now that has to do with keeping what we have is the Montecito Flood Control Master Plan, where there's a proposal to channelize over 6 miles of creek and to put in 8 new debris basins. And we really have to think about the long-term sustainability of plans like this. We're already taking sediment from our debris basins, and we don't necessarily have a great idea of what to do with it, so we end up taking it to upland locations. We take it to Goleta and Carpinteria Beach, and we really don't know what the long-term impacts of that are. And for a plan costing upwards of $1 billion, we need to make sure that we're making decisions where we're protecting the ecological integrity of our watersheds, because they're so important. And when we do that, we're not only protecting steelhead habitat, but we're also protecting our communities and the functions that our watersheds provide for us. So steelhead, as we've heard throughout the day, throughout the afternoon, are on the verge of extinction, especially on the San Ynez River. And I mentioned the petition that I started with Illuminate Conservation. Here's a QR code. I have one out front as well if anyone's interested in signing. We have an opportunity to protect these watersheds because they are the lifeblood of our community. They really provide us so much. They filter our drinking water, they slow floods, they provide wildlife corridors, and they're incredible habitat for steelhead. And when we work together, we can ensure that these areas will be here for future generations. And like I said before, I wasn't able to see a steelhead run when I was a kid. But if we work collectively and we support organizations like EDC, Cal Trout, and like the Fly Fishers, and obviously Santa Barbara Channel Keeper, we have the opportunity to leave the next generation with a better starting point and hopefully see those fish come back in the numbers that we have seen in these photos. So thank you so much.
Wow, I'm inspired by what a row of minds and efforts. It's just incredible. Next speaker is Mark Rockwell. I just want to clarify something. That picture that I was describing earlier of the, what was it, a 58-inch? Oh, 38-inch steelhead. He had to leave the country in order to see that. I think that was, or to catch that. I think that was Canada, if I'm not mistaken. But catch and release. Mark Rockwell.
Thank you, Tom. And I am just so impressed by everybody who's on the stage today and taking their time on a Sunday to talk about a fish that's special to me and I think special to us in Santa Barbara. So I just want to just have a applause for them for doing such a great job. And I think the other thing that I recognize is we're lucky to have them. We're in a period where science is not always looked up to. But without it, we would be lost. So, you know, we're lucky to have them, and we need to protect scientists because they give us the foundation upon which to do magical things. So with that, I just wanted to show you what steelhead really look like and how beautiful they really are. And try to connect you to how I see them. You know, if we just think of them as a fish, they're just a fish. There's lots of fish, right? But to me, they're just special. They're beautiful. These are new run fish just moved into fresh water that are beginning to take on their their rainbow trout look with the red gill plates and the red line down their side. The longer they're in fresh water, the more of that red hue develops. And I'll show you a picture of a fish right at the end that is a mature in the freshwater fish for quite a while. But when they first come in, they look like this. This is a newly arrived, spawning ready steelhead that, in my estimation, could be in that 35-inch range. I don't know. It's a big fish for sure. Well, take it any way you want, you know. The important thing is when they come out of the ocean, they are silver bright on the sides. They're sleek, muscular, and as you move up towards their back and their head, they take on that dark steel look, and that's why they're called steelhead, because they have a very darkish top and back of their head. So they're beautiful fish, is what I know, and they're mysterious because, as was said, we don't always know where they go once they enter the ocean. They're all over the place. So to me, they're just so special. And when you've been around them for a while, you realize that they inhabit beautiful places. They're not just beautiful fish. The places they live are beautiful. So as we've seen today, what on the left is what we had, and on the right is where we are today. You know, there's still a few fish around, but there aren't many. You can't fish for them anymore. You know, it's against the law because we had to protect them because they were headed in the wrong direction. So to me, I think what we want to do is to move forward in a way that is productive, and all of the people on the stage today are working to do that. What we need, honestly, is all of you out there in the audience to be involved with us in some way or another, whether that's sending an email sometime or writing a letter or signing your name onto a letter like a petition or something like that. We need the public support. You know, we in the Santa Barbara Fly Fishers decided that we'd be part of the solution, not part of the problem. All of us, when we fly fish for steelhead, we catch and release those fish. You know, and it would kill us, I think, if we thought we harmed one to the point where it died. So, you know, we just feel steelhead are just too valuable to lose, and extinction is not an option. So steelhead have been here for over 13,000 years, we know that for sure. And they're just like our ocean, mountain, and rivers. They need those places, and they are part of those places. And that's one of the things that makes Santa Barbara so distinctive, is we have the ocean, we have these rivers, and we have these beautiful mountains. And we share those things with this fish. And I don't think there is any other fish here that's like that. So I think it's unique. And we've joined California Trout and Kohler Winery to begin at least a barrier removal and hopefully enhance recovery on Zaca Creek. And thank you, Derek, and your family for making that step. What we're working for is recovery. And what recovery really means is not existence, which is what we have today. You know, they're not gone, they're not extinct, but they're just hanging on by their fins, I call it. You know, you remember seeing a picture of the cat hanging on a screen with its claws? That's kind of where these fish are. They're hanging on with their fins. So recovery really means we have an enhanced population that is healthy and that it's distributed throughout its watershed, not just in one location like Topanga Creek, for example, in the LA Basin, where extraordinary effort had to be taken in order to save those fish there. And then put them in trucks and take them to a hatchery. And then now what do we do with them? Well, gosh, the watershed won't support them for years. So, well, let's take them to Santa Barbara County and put them in a stream that had lost all its fish some years before. So we have a lot of work to do. And I think, you know, you're part of the solution. How many of you are willing to join me as being part of the solution? Beautiful. I appreciate that. This again is the barrier on Zacher Creek. We got to get that puppy out of there. So that's what we're hoping to do maybe later this year if we can get some funding. And we appreciate Caltrout being so diligent and working so hard on this and other projects like you have heard today from Russell. So recovery involves all of us. And if you go in your program, all of you have your program, if you look at the bottom of page 2, there's a QR code there. If you just use your phone and put your camera on the QR code, you can click a little line right below the picture that will take you to a registration form for the Santa Barbara Fly Fishers, where you can put in your name and your email address so that we can contact you and invite you to other things like we're going to have in, I think, sometime in June, it looks like, a reception of some type out at Kohler Winery, so you all could come out and see not only the winery, but also see the barrier that's going to be taken out, and we can spend some more time together talking about the recovery process there. So if you fill that out, I would appreciate it. It is in your program. So, and it's also in our logo slide that you'll see up here. So, and below that is a picture of a steelhead that I caught in British Columbia some years ago that was in the water, probably in the river system for probably around a month. And you can see how it's reddening up there. And they just become more and more beautiful over time as they're in the water. So join us all. I appreciate you being here today, and we're gonna have a question and answer session that Tom's going to introduce us to. So.
Thanks, Mark. Those of you who want to ask a question, I think we left off and cut off a woman over here on the left with a question.
I want to thank all of you for everything you've done. I was born in Santa Barbara in 1951. I've fished all the creeks. Santa Monica Creek wasn't on there. I know where the fish are there. My teacher, one of my old teachers was Victor Lopez, Sky Eagle, coastal Chumash. He had steelhead right by his house, but he was washed away. But my father, who built the dolphin fountain, used that logo, and those are dolphins. Those are alukai. So it's a Chumash painting, but that's what they are. So maybe you could give them some color. Anyway, I thank you very much. You stand on the shoulders of giants. I want you to know that. We all worked very hard on the steelhead in Santa Barbara. So thank you very much, and God bless.
Thank you.
So my question's still relevant from the previous session. So Santa Barbara County was one of the first counties to go into a drought in California, and it was in a drought for the longest period, right? And to echo Nakia's words earlier, that water is life, I'm really interested, Brian, on what's happening with Buellton and how that's interplaying with the groundwater sustainability efforts that are going on statewide. You know, to touch on the groundwater dependent ecosystems effort, we had chats earlier about the hydrograph on St. Inez River and how important that is to the groundwater health and that in-stream flow support. And so how is SGMA and individual well applications to the State Water Board interplaying with one another? And then I know in Ventura County, we have environmental representatives on our groundwater sustainability agencies, and I'd just like to understand a little bit better what's happening in Santa Barbara County with advocating for steelhead and groundwater pen ecosystems, and particularly steelhead. Thanks.
Thank you, Candace, and also want to acknowledge Candace for all her work to protect steelhead in our area with Coastal Ranches Conservancy. Yeah, you know, a biologist that we work with, Dr. Bill Trush, called the steelhead in the San Ynez River and the Ventura River the groundwater fish, because they relied on groundwater to keep the rivers flowing, to keep them alive during the summer. And with all the wells that have gone in and all the dams, we no longer have free-flowing rivers during the summertime most years. So the state did pass a law about 10 years ago, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, or SGMA, which was intended to ensure that our use of groundwater was more sustainable than it's been in the past. I mentioned earlier that there's no regulation for groundwater wells, no environmental regulation. There have been lawsuits recently over that, and up in Sonoma County, the water well ordinance did not protect steelhead. It allowed groundwater wells near creeks and rivers that would dry them up and harm the steelhead. Well, this is a new area where a new tool groups are using to protect the groundwater and steelhead. And the National Marine Fisheries Service asked Santa Barbara County to pass a water well ordinance that requires a permit that triggers environmental review and protection of our creeks, rivers, and steelhead. The county hasn't taken up that opportunity yet, but we've certainly reiterated with the county that that's something they should do, and we're setting up a meeting with the county to talk about that so that our groundwater basins don't get overdrafted, further harming our steelhead. I'm sure there may be other people up here that would want to speak to this issue.
Just a quick comment. Thank you, Candace, for that question. We do monitor that area right around the Buellton wells, and we do provide data to those that are fighting that cause, because there are some pretty critical habitat right upstream and actually right downstream as well. So we're providing the data for some of the research that's been going on in there. And if any of you are interested in our data, I will put out a pitch that we do put out a annual monitoring report it's several hundred pages long that's on our webpage. So if you want to know what's going on in the San Ynez, you certainly can go and look at it there.
Thank you. Next.
I just want to thank the Santa Barbara Fly Fishers for organizing this, and also for the panel for donating your time. This is a very important project. It's kind of visionary, but if the long-term goal is to be able to create a pathway for the fish to get back up to the headwaters to that 70% of spawning habitat, that's going to be a long, long project. So if 30% of the spawning habitat is below the dam, it seems that that would be the easiest, well, maybe not necessarily easiest, but the more doable path to try and sustain these fish if they're hanging by their fins. So what concerted efforts are in play for that 30% of the spawning habitat is being done? And if there's a way for the water purveyors and all of you on this council would be able to put public notice on projects that are ongoing, and if it's just habitat cleanup along the riverbank where the public can help, or how do you get the buy-in from all of the constituents that use it? The fish don't have a voice, but they are constituents. They use the water. But the water purveyors, the landowners, the farmers, everybody involved, you know, how do you get the right releases at the right time to make sure those fish are viable? So that's kind of my long-winded question. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate those comments. And I just wanted to let everybody know that our Save Santa Barbara Steelhead Coalition, I would say, is working on projects, or going to be focused on projects that are below the dam in that 30+% area that steelhead still have access to, because that's certainly a place we can have an impact relatively quickly without having to take get fish around a dam or get out from behind the dam or all of those things. So we're working on that, and that's where we're focused, and we hope to work with Cal Trout and EDC and the Coastal Ranchers Conservancy and others to facilitate that. And I think we have great teammates in all of this. So.
Yeah, and just to address that as well, that has been a focus in the last number of years. Some of the work that Tim Robinson was talking about was in that 30% area. So the barriers that are moved on Salsa Puedes and Ojaro Creek, on Hilton Creek and Kyoto, these are all tributaries to the San Ynez River, the lower San Ynez River. So that has definitely been one of our priorities because sometimes taking those little bites is easier and faster than doing the biggest projects possible. So there's still lots of barriers and work to do. Zaca Creek is another one that comes in below Bradbury Dam. So another potential area on that 30% to focus on.
Thanks for the question. I think my group's been working for 20, 30 years on all those low-lying fruit below Bradbury Dam type barrier removals. We've done a pretty remarkable job, as you saw on that list that I put up there. If you noticed on the tributaries that I highlighted there, all of them were on the south side. They had northern aspects. That means that it's cooler, more perennial spring-fed streams, and so that's the area that we really want to concentrate on. The upper part, the northern section, is southerly exposed. It's got a long floodplain. The habitats that are viable for fish are they're way up high, and Zaca's about the only viable small little pocket. All the other streams up there go completely dry in the summertime. So that's why you saw all that energy going on in the south. Places where there's a lot of ag that's happened there, like Nahoe, Nahoki, Nojoki, depending on who you talk to, that watershed has been pumped like nobody's business. It goes completely dry now, or it used to not. It used to be a viable area, but not anymore. And then, I can talk to you, everybody individually about every one of those creeks along there and what we know and what we've studied there. And truly, we've really done a remarkable job of tackling most of those barriers. Zaca is an interesting creek, but it's got 14 barriers on it, and we really need to put together a watershed plan and start tackling from the bottom up and put that into play. So we look forward to working with the Santa Barbara Fly Fishers on that note.
And I might just add quickly on that before we get to the next question that, that lower section of the San Ynez River, it's not the best habitat. It was, typically just a migratory corridor to get upstream from Kachuma where the better habitat is. And we can remove all these barriers, and it's amazing work that Tim and his group and Cal Fish and Wildlife and now Kohler Winery and Cal Trout are doing to, provide access. But if we don't have the water in that river because it's all stored behind Kachuma, then we're never going to be fully successful in even restoring a small run below Kachuma. So the Kachuma project's governed by the Endangered Species Act. That requires that actions be taken to protect the species. And it's critical that the Kachuma project find ways to, as recommended by the National Marine Fisheries Service in 2016, release enough water to make a viable habitat downstream from Kachuma. And it's not water for fish versus water for people, because that water that's released not only supports fish, but it recharges the groundwater basin. It's multi-use. So there are solutions out there. They include removing the barriers and restoring the flows.
Go ahead.
Obviously, a lot of the habitat y'all are talking about are in-stream and riparian areas, but there's sort of a big gorilla on the 800 pounds on the south central coast and watersheds, which is the Los Padres National Forest, which unfortunately, they're having these categorical exclusions to bypass environmental review, and they want to log sacred ridgetops from Big Sur all the way down to beyond Ojai and towards Sespe and things. And so even though there's more ongoing flow from northern forests, but I imagine large trees have their water stores and provide some flow, but so some of these sort of the macro scale of Los Padres National Forest, let alone what, this is even before Chump came on the scene, but how much do you consider groves further up the hill, which then have their water head down into the streams? But if the groves are gone, likely less water.
Is this a question of the protection of the upper, of the trees and
Yeah. Anyway, the main forest in the area they're after, they want to log those ridge tops.
Go for
as
it.
If it's a, of course, that fuels management. They keep coming up with a lingo. Basically, they just want to cut big trees, just like they've always wanted to cut big commercial conifer trees. So anyway, even though you're obviously focused closer to streams, but we gotta
Thank you
look
so
at the
much
greater
for your
expanse.
question and raising this important issue of the Los Padres Forest, what they initially called the Ecological Restoration Project, but had to take that name back because it's, logging is not ecological restoration, but it's a 200,000 plus acre proposal in the Los Padres National Forest from Ventura up through Monterey to clear and treat native vegetation under the guise of reducing fire hazards. But that will have significant impacts on our watersheds in terms of collecting the moisture from the atmosphere and the rainfall, infiltrating it into the mountainside so that it can seep out as springs and seeps, supporting our creeks and rivers and ultimately the steelhead. This is an issue that EDC is involved with, working with our client, the Los Padres Forest Watch, another unbelievable local environmental organization. But it's certainly something that people should look into and support efforts to protect our forest. And we feel there's a better way to provide fire protection, and that is to focus not in the wildlands where people don't live and aren't directly threatened, but to harden homes in the urban areas and do defensible space clearing along the wildland-urban interface. It's a much more effective and efficient way and less environmentally damaging way to protect our communities from fire than logging and masticating chaparral in the backcountry. Thank you.
Very good, very good. We've got time for just this one more question, if we could. Oh, there we go.
I'd like to start out by thanking all the panelists for your presentations today and for your years and years of efforts on behalf of Steelhead. Really appreciate that. We started out the panel hearing about the successful removal of the dams up on the Klamath, which took 20 years to make happen, but only took one season for salmon to start getting back up that river and spawning. So it's just an incredible 2 weeks. Incredible success story, and so that got me thinking. All these small projects are really important, but the big fish in Santa Barbara County is Bradbury Dam and the Upper San Ynez River dams. And what you see with all dams, particularly in the west, is sedimentation in the dams. Gibraltar is 80+% full of sediment. We saw the pictures of Matilaha. Same thing. As we have wildfires in the upper San Ynez watershed, we're going to get massive amounts of sediment coming into Kachuma behind Bradbury. So my question is, do we have any plan? Is there a beginning of a plan for dam removal on the upper San Ynez? Obviously, water supply is important. That's regional water supply is why those dams were put in, but they're getting less and less effective for that purpose. And obviously they've wiped out 99%. We used to have tens of thousands of steelhead coming up San Ynez River, wiped out 99% of the fish. So the balance has changed, and maybe there have been new technologies over the last 70 years. Maybe we've got high water diversion or something like that. Is there any planning in place so that maybe 20 years from now, the San Ynez becomes the Klamath?
I'm going to just inject just a thought with that of in 80-something or other, we had California Water voted into bringing water from Northern California, not that we want to steal their water, but integrating that question with California water, if somebody could address that.
Well, if you haven't figured it out yet, water's complicated, and that's a good question, but it's really difficult to answer. And the short answer is no. There isn't a plan to remove those critical water supply dams and reservoirs. It would be nice to have that because those 3 reservoirs that are out there are all maturing, as you mentioned. One of them's topped off with sediment up to the sill. The upper one is about 50%, and those ones hold back the sediment that comes down to Lake Kachuma. And now with those guys not holding back sediment, that means Lake Kachuma is going to lose its capacity and faster than it has over the last so many years. Reclamation is really slow on facing the music and putting a plan in play. I work with Reclamation, but I'm really the albatross to try and get them to do what they should do. So we bring it to their attention constantly that they need to spend some time and some really careful thinking about what to do about it. So at the moment, they're working a little bit on fish passage around Bradbury Dam and Lake Kachuma, and that's a complicated issue that we can talk about offline. But no plan, but we should have one, and do talk to Reclamation. They really should get after it, and thanks to these guys on my right and left, they definitely ring their bell trying to get them to think about it and get going on it.
Yeah, thank you so much for the question and for all you've done for our creeks and Steelhead in this area. It is a tough issue, and Lake Kachuma Reservoir supplies a big portion of our water supply here, and people haven't found another way to replace that, but that's what we need to be focusing on. We need to be thinking about what other water supplies can we tap into that don't require damming the rivers and relegating the Steelhead to the history books. And so I think there's a lot of progress that can be made with potable reuse of our water, recycling our water so that we don't need to take so much out of our rivers. And then, yes, maybe off-channel or diversions that don't have dams, or some sort of off-channel reservoirs for storage that don't dam the main stems of river. But at some point, as Tim points out, Kachuma's going to start filling in faster. The 3 debris basins up in the upper watershed, Caliente, Mono debris, and the other one are already completely full, and Gibraltar, as you mentioned, is 80–90% full. So Kachuma's got a limited life, and we need to be starting that planning now. Fish passage over Bradbury Dam, yeah, that's another stopgap measure. We're pushing for it, but what the recovery plan calls for is volitional migration of steelhead, not being captured and carried upstream, or some sort of fish ladder. And I think that the first step is what are we going to replace the Kachuma water with, and that is a conversation that needed to start yesterday.
Very good. Questions?
If you haven't figured it out, Brian is job security for me.
I was going to say vice versa, but no, we're good. We're colleagues.
Go ahead, Mark.
So thank you, everybody, for answering questions and asking questions and being part of our town hall gathering today on Steelhead. We feel this is the start of something big. It's not the one and only. And again, I want to refer you to our QR code that's in your program. I also want to say to you, we promise that we will not share the information, your name or email address, with anybody outside of ourselves. But there are things that we want to do moving forward, things like going to the city and county governments and requesting proclamations to support Southern Steelhead in our city and in our county. I think that's a very important thing for them to be focused on, so that they don't pass rules or regulations and new projects that further depress water beyond where it is today, and in fact may look at other types of progressive water management techniques that allow us to use our water more than once. That doesn't necessarily mean we'll always flush our toilet and then we'll drink it 2 days later. What it does mean is we can recycle and reuse water over and over again. And we don't do that enough. We kind of have this, once it's gone to the ocean kind of attitude. And the truth is we could reuse that same water over and over again multiple times. So there's a lot of strategies that are out there, and we want to be part of that, and we want to include all of you in our effort with the Santa Barbara Fly Fishers. So you could really get engaged. You could join as a member. Now that's the concept that we would introduce in certainly support. But beyond that, just join with our Save Santa Barbara Steelhead Coalition by filling in your name and email address on that QR code. And thank you today for coming. I want you to invite you to come. And for those of you who are not coming to the fly fishing film tour showings tonight that start at basically be here at 6:30, you're really missing out on some really wonderful films. So if you have any time tonight, buy a couple of tickets and come to that. And we hope to see you soon. So thank you very much for being here, and thank you to all of the panelists up here. They did a fantastic job.